This is an introduction to Fred Turner's autobiographical poem, Return. In December 2024, the Bass School at the University of Texas at Dallas celebrated the career of Dr. Fred Turner. After publishing nearly 50 books, teaching for almost 6 decades, and venturing into various areas of study over his lifetime, Turner championed the humanities as the greatest pillar of knowledge and research. In the traditional university, the School of Arts and Humanities is the core of the university, Turner said. That is the place where all the various lines of research and activity are understood in relationship to each other. In 1985, the late Robert Corrigan, Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, or A&H, at the University of Texas at Dallas, hired Turner. A&H, founded in 1975, was in its 10th year when Turner joined UTD as Founders Professor of Literature and Creative Writing. He taught courses on English literature, including Shakespeare and Renaissance studies and performance studies. An acclaimed poet, critic, and essayist, Turner published around 20 books during his 35-year career at UT Dallas. He's known for his epics, long narrative poems recounting heroic deeds, such as The New World, an epic poem in 1985, Genesis, an epic poem of terraforming Mars, 1988, and Apocalypse, an epic poem, 2016. Although Turner retired from UT Dallas in 2020, he remained close to the university, contributing through talks and attending lectures. My name is Bob Stern. I'm a geologist and a UTD faculty member. I came to know Fred through our shared interest on emergence, including working with him on 2 papers in the Athenaeum Review, one of them entitled A Brief History of Emergence, published in winter 2024, and the other is Understanding the Senex, the Figure of the Older Human Being, in spring of 2025. We also interacted weekly with Roger Molina and others to bring an understanding and appreciation of emergence to UTD. I am handicapped and recently began to teach remotely using Teams, which is the official UTD Zoom-like online video communication tool. In 1 year of frequent use, I have evolved from Teams-phobic to Teams-philic, and I wanted to experiment with its capabilities. I learned that Fred had written a poem about his life, and I asked him if he'd like to use Teams to record it. He agreed, and beginning in early June, we embarked on a series of Thursday morning Teams meetings where I recorded his reading one of the 9 sections of his poem, Return. UTD student Anna Z edited the recordings and produced this podcast. We finished the 9 recordings on August 28th, exactly 1 week before he died. At the time, he was vigorous and strong, and neither of us had any idea of what was to come. We were planning to record this introduction the day he died. Here's how Fred explains his poem. Return is a poem about search for meaning of meaning, the search for meaning of meaning in one poet's life. It is not an autobiography, but draws heavily on his life. And some readers may be curious about the curriculum vitae behind the search. I was born in 1943 in England during World War II to Victor Witter Turner and Edith Lucy Brocklesby Turner. My father came from a Scottish family with mixed middle-class British ancestry. My mother, whose parents descended from several distinguished British upper-class families, including several aristocratic lines such as the Howards, was raised by Anglican Fabian parents with ecclesiastical, medical, and missionary backgrounds. At the time of my birth, my parents were extremely idealistic, pacifistic communists, and married without the consent of either family. Vic, my father, as a conscientious objector, trained in the Army as a bomb disposal technician, a somewhat disposable role in itself. My mother, Edie, worked in the land army as an agricultural laborer. We lived in an old-fashioned gypsy caravan, which my father bought for £10, and there I was raised, and my brother Robert was born. After the war, Vic trained as an anthropologist at London University and got a grant to study the Ndubu people of northern Rhodesia, now Zambia. We lived, meanwhile, in Hastings on the south coast with Vic's mother, Violet, a former classical actress, and my great grandmother. There, my sister Irene was born. Vic took a quick exploratory trip to Africa and then came back for us. In 1951, we took a steamer to Cape Town and found our way by train and truck to Mwinilunga, where we stayed for over a year. We returned to England for a few months, where Vic had been hired by Manchester University's distinguished anthropology department, and then went back to Mwinilunga for another year, with a 4-month stay in Cape Town before returning to Manchester. I studied at Manchester Grammar School from 1955 to 1961 and was accepted by the College of Christ Church at Oxford, where I read English language and literature. During vacations in my school and undergraduate days, I hitchhiked alone or with a companion around Britain, especially the Scottish Highlands, and in several European countries. Later, around North America. In my gap year, I stayed with my family in Palo Alto, California, where my father had been invited for a year by Stanford University's Institute for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences, and worked on a charity project in Mexico. I started as an undergraduate at Oxford in 1962. While at Oxford, I met my future wife, Mei Lin Chang, a student at St. Anne's College. Meanwhile, Vic got a professorship at Cornell University in New York State, and two more brothers, Alex and Rory, were born. After I had graduated and went on to take an advanced degree with a dissertation on Shakespeare and the nature of time, we were married in 1966. We lived for a while in a thatched 16th century cottage lent to us by a friend, then rented a room from Mrs. Collingwood, the widow of my favorite historian at that time, R.G. Collingwood. In 1967, I started my teaching career as an assistant professor with the University of California at Santa Barbara. My Shakespeare book was published by Clarendon Press, and I ran a lively, mostly beat poets poetry program in Santa Barbara, publishing 3 chapbooks of poetry with Unicorn Press and a major collection, Between Two Lives, with Wesleyan University Press. We lived in an old cedar house overlooking the city and the Pacific. Our first son, Daniel, was born in 1968. Rather unhappy with the polarized political climate at Santa Barbara, I accepted an associate professor position at Kenyon College, Gambier, Ohio, in 1972. There we designed a home and helped build it, and we cleared some of the forest for a garden. Our second son, Ben, was born there in 1981. At Kenyon, I published 4 books of poetry, including The New World, my first epic poem. Then followed a science fiction novel set on Mars, A Double Shadow, and many essays on subjects as varied as Chaucer, the study of time, the contemporary poetic scene, and environmental philosophy. A major piece entitled The Neural Lyre, Poetic Meter, the Brain, and Time, in collaboration with the German neuroscientist Ernst Poppel on poetic meter and the human brain, won Poetry's magazine highest prize and became very influential in the emerging new formalist movement. My colleague Ron Sharp and I restarted the then dormant Kenyon Review as a strongly interdisciplinary journal of ideas, poetry, and resurgent culture. Mei Lin worked for the Kenyon Festival Theater. When the college, in financial hard times, decided to cancel the summer theater and gave much of the control of the Kenyon Review over to an English department committee, we felt less welcome. And after a year on a visiting appointment back in England at the University of Exeter, I accepted the offer of a chair professorship at the expanding and dynamic School of Arts and Humanities at the University of Texas at Dallas. I flew from Crete, where we were vacationing, to Dallas for my interview, and we settled in Richardson, the northern suburb where the new university was being built in 1985. At UTD, I published 8 books outlining my cultural program, including Natural Classicism, Essays on Literature and Science, Rebirth of Value, Meditations on Beauty, Ecology, Religion, and Education, Tempest, Flute, and Oz, Essays on the Future, Beauty, the Value of Values, The Culture of Hope, A New Birth of the Classical Spirit, Shakespeare's 20th Century Economics, Natural Religion, and Epic Form Content in History. I also published 2 more epic poems, Genesis, chronicling the gardening and founding of a civilization on Mars, and Apocalypse, about the birth of a superintelligence and the rescue of the Earth from a climate catastrophe, and several collections of shorter poems. I met my remarkable colleague, Susanna Oswald, a Holocaust survivor at UTD, and we began a long collaboration of co-translation, including from the Hungarian poet Miklos Radnóti and many other Hungarian poets, and from German, especially Goethe. My student, Gyiki Marinai, turned out to be a truly major Albanian poet, and we worked together on his first full collection of poetry in English translation, Teach Me How to Whisper, Horses, and other poems. With other translators, I translated poetry from the Chinese, Vietnamese, and Bengali. I now help Marinai co-edit Mundus Artium, an international journal of ideas and poetry. I retired from UTD in 2020 after 35 years of service. During that time, I traveled with my family or with Mei Lin or alone to many countries and participated in dozens of conferences on many subjects. I've never ceased to read widely, especially in the natural sciences, and I tried to spark interdisciplinary conversations with its beckoning glow of the emergence of new ideas in many different contexts. I'm deeply and bitterly aware of the many people in my life that I've left out of this poem, which, in order to have its integrity as a poem, could not be allowed to wander from its strict exploration of just the one thread of my life, its questioning of the idea of meaning. I hope you enjoy his autobiographical poem as much as I did. Hello, I'm Bob Stern, and we're with Fred Turner, who is a poet and has a poem about his life. So, Fred, will you start reading?
Sure. The poem is entitled Return, which is, I guess, also it's the same letters that make up my name, Turner. And it's in several parts. And the first part begins with a series of puns, and you'll hear some of them. I, number 1, the I who sees this. I, that one. I, what of him, poor stammerer? That islander. One needs to dwell on him a while, for all else fails me now, having been said and done, or failed in trying to turn my givens into spring. It seems that I was always ever turning to never turn where turners turned before me, honoring their originality. So I was always lost, but lost's a country that kin of mine had mined and made their own, a state of mind that's all that I call mine, not minding being lost, for that is time. Trace then, retrace the turning of the ways this maze of words amazedly first wove. They was my first word for myself. It meant my shy and secret turn inside myself to where the rich, dark, sweet stuff lay, so like the warm flow ready from the veined white source. That pillow of the world where I would sleep, but not the same. That inner liquor brewed and fizzed with what I later called ideas. Mummy and Daddy and the red-haired child who was the center of the world, we lived inside a cubbyhole on 4 red wheels. I can't remember, but perhaps I do. But that's what's doing the remembering, that mumbering, the bundled slumbering, rocked in the ocean of identity that always was the sentience that sees. Always the traveller, I, traveller, travailer, use that packed self as stores to rummage in for something that would serve at the next passage, but never fathomed that it was a land worth fathoming and sounding for itself. An eon in a weekend bag, a blood-begetting marrow in the bones, an ocean in a suitcase. What strange islands basked there in their moonlight oddity! The dreams, unquestionably mine, were snapshots taken and lost at once of Mare Nostrum, an inner ocean for an Odyssey. This could not be a novelistic thing. One thing that fierce self knew was that it never would or could be compassed by a Freud, however wise, as my dead friend Fred Firestein, the psychoanalyst, knew well at once. Nor was it socially constructed. How, stranger always, could a soul like this accrete a social exoskeleton? These bones grew by themselves. Their anecdote fitted no model, but cannibalized models. I must swim like a shark or I would drown. I ate my way through patterns of the mind. Mind you, I don't much like that self, I say. It still too much reminds me of my mother, Greedy Edie, as she called herself, the rebel of the Davis family. Rebellion is such a waste of time. This drought that drives me inward is a glut of all the narcissistic rage out there, but hers were the sweet breasts that built my bones. The red wheels were the gypsy caravans we lived in the last years of the war. Edie and Vic are dead, and I can't ask them if they were red or did my fancy paint them. That light falls now upon a planet 77 light years away, the far edge of my being. I can't run after it to catch it now. Red, though, was the map of Britain in the advert for the English driving school pasted inside the tiny post office, whose Welsh arms held a steering wheel beneath the wise, long-headed cranium of Scotland. And we were Reds then. Both the families had cut us off, and Vic refused to fight, but dug up unexploded German bombs with poets, pacifists, philosophers. Edie, a long-limbed girl, worked in the fields. And then, quite suddenly, there was my brother. Bobby, as he would boast, was born in a field. And so it was a little family. Edie cooked porridge on the glowing stove. I tried to milk the happy bull next door. Bob's big white face went grieved when I would pinch him. I pinched him out of love, though, and he knew it. Bob ever since can smile and frown at once. One little slip disabling the fuse could have destroyed it all, for paradise is built upon the knife edge of a cliff. Oh, Vic! His black hair curly in my hands when he would bear me howdahed on his shoulders and snort his trunk when I would spur him on. How he'd extract a threepence from my ear and read us stories every night forever. But that was later, in St. Leonard's, while after the war he learned his craft in London, we in his mother's flat beside the sea. How quickly this becomes biography. The poet's life, what interest in that? As if the holy child were singled out, or special virtue raised him above others, or some key factor in his upbringing were replicable and should now be taught. Or worse, why read the hard and puzzling poetry when you can peck the life that it's about? Or worse still, you seduce his mana and take it for your own, its conqueror. There's only one secret ingredient, and that is what this late foray will seek. I've seen so many poets spend at once the magic of their childhood and their self, the nectar of their lost virginity, the glamour of their early recognition, and spend another 30 years in reruns, drugs and divorce and self-plagiarism, seeking the lost sources of their Nile. I thought me wise to hoard and hide my story. This is for those who brook my own denial. For this is about something different. It is the self, that archipelago we all contain, that merits human rights, that blossoms unto death with fertile dreams, that promises and keeps its promises, that seeks the truth in all its bizarre ways. Poets contain it no more than do others. But poets are technicians of the craft that can explore it, mariners whose knots and sheets and splices hoist the winds that sweep the waters of the inner ocean, whose compass, cross-staff, astrolabe, and plummet can fix coordinates and sound the grounds. Let this then be a chart, a log, a pattern, an old-time rotter for a further search. The sketches of those coasts, just aid memoir that curious natives wave from as we pass. Don't get Wordsworthian. The worth of words is not here to describe, but be the soul. The forces in between the chess pieces create the pieces, new in every game. Grammar can carve and graph and program the footholds of the baby synapses that form the net that catches memory. Vic was a punster. In his later days, he'd get one off. Then, with his tongue, would thrust his dentures out to make an alien grin. His eyes would gleam, and Edie would join in, matter and patter, matter, yes, and pattern, making a new graft in the ancient tree, espaliered the fresh scion with the stock, and wove me to a web of poetry. Their Proto-Indo-European game would get more multilingual by and by, and Vic would pun in Bantu in his cups, mating his language with its ancient kin, drawing back lines together separated by myriad eras of linguistic time. And ancient roots would diddle with their cousins, incest, he said, making the heart grow fonder. Feelings, the radiant yellow of a wave of joy, cuddled and full of honey, sharp as dream, almost too dangerous to be endured, because, being come, it could be snatched away. Joy was an opening door, a garden where, amid all flowers, there was one special flower. And rage so red my skin would sear and sting, and my small teeth so itched and itched to bite. I bit a teacher once who had clenched my wrist to take me to the cold grey headmistress. Rage full of grief that they would steal my Fredness. They did not understand the inner me. I couldn't say my word. I didn't know it. They wouldn't let me find it, give me time. I'd hurt them all, the rotten rotters. Yes, rage was such a swollen, glowing pleasure. And there was terror. Taking me to school, Mummy and I would pass the Nag's Head pub, whose sign, a screaming witch gagged with a bridle, was for the child the total of all fears, the waking nightmare, casting shades of black across the margins of my eyes, all down the street. Mummy must put her hand over my eyes and hold my hand as well and not let go. Yes, Mercatorius Street. The name itself still drags a little at the quaking heart. And grief. Bad Johnny Braybrooke stole my scooter, and when I couldn't find it, how I wept. Heartbreak is not quite it. The heart was sucked into my throat and blocked my voice and breath. The sobs were spasms, sweet blue sugar lumps, loss tearing loose some portal in the self, making the future different from the past, a wet dawn fresh with liberation's tears. And there was love, the smell of Bobby's head, and Daddy doing all the voices in the story, and Mummy like the hearth at Christmas time. And then one day we peered into the crib, and in the soft white blanket lay a baby, our brand new sister, like a little rose. Joy, rage and terror, grief and love, sounds retroactively applied to what was prior, sounds retroactively applied to what was prior. Aren't those words a brilliant invention? Like hers who first found you could eat a snail or put a fire between the stones to cook it? And not to speak of bird's nest soup or cheese or finding rotted grass seed water fun. Nature is such inventions. They branch out, and natus did to nature, natural, stemming from older roots like gnath or gand, whose other shoots are genus, generate, gender and genital, general and gene, and in the colder north sprouted as kind and kinder, kin and kingship, humankind. My little loves and rages were one tip of an immense tree, barnstock, Yggdrasil, Asvata, Yaxche, or the tree of life. Darwin's crude sketch had rediscovered it, and since then we have seen the superforce branching to gravity, the weak and strong, and then electromagnetism and all the rest, chemistry, crystals, and the living cell. So nature is the branching of the word. To name those gods that wrestle us with passion, the reason of the species, we to survive, is to make new gods blossom from the old, a game with more reality than the real. The old professor lectures here, who once screamed in his strong restraining mother's arms. Fred, freed and read no more, though some have read him, returns now to the stock where he was born, the arms that bore him, that would bore him later, whose passing later still he could not bear to feel then, having failed to bear her up when on the road she stumbled and so fell and got her death stroke from the bruise she bore. Fred, freed indeed, could not do what he list. I missed a word when I was listing feelings, the darkest, cruelest word of all, that's shame. It's haunting in the French, that bitter honte, which still is cognate with the sweet honneur. In German, Scham is shame, and also vulva, for shame's the birth canal of all the virtues, where inter faces there et urinam, the saviour among beasts, they say, was born. How strange that shamelessness is worse than shame. Shame suffered and borne up with is a gift that every grace can only imitate. That's what I found, and that made me a poet. For only when the armor of the self was broken and the spring air could come in, could I perceive the constant miracle of life aware upon the edge of time. Honor is shame endured, as Gawain knew his stolen girdle green for life and spring became the noble garter of his order, and honi soit the badge of honesty. A nation without shame can have no beauty. The heart shock of a shame's what gives us being, the sword drawn from the stock of discipline. Now Gran, Violet Witter, lived above us, the one-time darling of the Scottish stage. She had decided after all to love us. I was her favourite, her beau, her page. On me she wrote the forescript of her calling, stage fighting, the art of public speech, how to explain without the tension falling, letting the other actors each be each. I saw Blithe Spirit with her, and we shared black magic chocolates at intermission. What it all meant I neither knew nor cared, but this was surely some kind of vocation, a different Freddie with his sly grandmother, the freeing of the self to be another. There was a little park 2 streets away, the other way than Mercatoria, where I would play with pretty blue-eyed Christine and made a hideout in the shrubbery where we were safe and watched the folk go by. Then Vic was gone. I pined and pined for him. He was in Africa, gone to prepare the place we'd join him there in Mwinilunga. I didn't understand all that. He'd gone. I had a dream I was in bed, dreadfully plausible, therefore, when then the ceiling cracked, a great monster broke through, all black and green and yellow, spikes and horns, but no clear shape, no sense or meaning in it, but that it must descend on me, destroy me. Mummy found me sleepwalking, terrified, made me hot milk with cheerful Ovaltine, and put me back to bed when I was calm. But I had never waked, didn't remember the real comfort, but the dread, the dream. From then on, I would use the suffix "orn" for anything that might be terrifying. To add it, to add it to a normal word would make it evil, malevolent, and this was poetry. And then we followed Vic to Africa. That was the making of my first big question. Aboard the Union Castle ship Umtali, I think I saw there could be different worlds. The ship itself was such a world. I pried through every nook and clanging cranny of it, explored the panelled lounge and smoking room, and felt the thrum of the propellers lull me as I drowsed off inside my cozy bunk. I was so happy, the adventurer who boldly grasped a stay and stared to windward. The question deepened one day as I sat sheltered from wind beside a funnel vent. I learned that if I pressed one eye, I saw two worlds. So what was I to make of this? They weren't quite the same. Which one was right? Was there a difference between what's out there and what this fellow inside now was seeing? Did other people see the same world I did? And what had given me this instrument, this eye, with its so marvelous precision? Later, I asked if words were like that too, and if a word was something in the world. One morning I awoke and saw an island. Ascension, it was called. The ship had slowed, and little wavelets, violet and blue, danced in the dawn. The peak blazed in the sun. Part 2. Queuing at customs and a bright new land. The blue train, winding its foreshortened snake up that so blessed valley of the Hex, and through the coastal ranges to the veldt, the locomotive, driven by its 8-ganged wheels, trailing heroic plumes of smoke and steam. My heart now aches for it, the mythic land, an empire of quixotic overreaching, Great Britain swaying 1/3 of the world, an enterprise to me so innocent, grand history so unredeemable. After the great escarpment, the carroo, dinner in the racketing dining car, the blue train flying now through empty land, tickety tum, bound now for dusty Kimberley through falling dusk, a pink horizon over distant hills, and then to climb into the bunk on top, the railway sheet slick on the dark green leather, and drowse off to the rhythm of the tracks, and then to sense a change and come awake, the train now slowed to let another by, tackety-tum, tackety-tum, and then to wake again at midnight at some station, a few quiet conversations on the platform, the mighty engine breathing as it drinks, unwearied in its mantle of warm steam, and then, most magical of all, to wake and see a vast dawn land stretch out and yawn, the window inches from my tousled head. This way of telling it, I came to find, could make a long dead world come back to life. It wasn't dead, it would be always there, for words have got a most miraculous gift to summon all the world to their command, and in our secret bedchamber of mind lay out the ancient days untarnished still. I crossed that desert 4 times altogether, and made the ocean passage 3 more times. But memory collapses them to one, so I am lying here in some cold sense. Maybe ascension was the second time. Maybe the midnight station was the third. Or could it be there's a truth that forms only across pluralities of times, seen in a kind of temporal 3D, and I must see the stanchion on the ship twice to complete its true solidity. When Wordsworth saw that vast form rise behind him on Windermere, was that a mere illusion? Light is not only how we know, they say, but is the inner substance of all knowns. For after all, E equals mc squared. Matter is but a diamond of crushed light. Another picture, when we crossed the bridge over the Lunga River to the town of Mwinilunga, after days of driving across the huge savannas in our truck, now scratched and dusty from the red dirt roads, I saw a vision like an ancient scene out of a story of the washerwomen, black as obsidian in their bright prints, singing together, laundering on the rocks, and we were now at home in Africa. Today I see what seems to me a truth that would not be complete without both visions, the women on the rocks seen by the child, and now data mined from an old man's mind, the biblic Odyssean pastoral. Those years in Winilonga were an era that took well nigh a third of my short life. It's tastes and smells that do it always, don't they? The smell of locusts, turmeric and honey, burnt tires and cumin, orchids, dried out dung, hot sour cassava in a sticky mound, black skin and village dogs and smoke and love, the resin dripped onto the drumhead when the holy beating of the rites began. We settled in a village called Kajima near the Angola and the Congo borders, where the Zambezi takes its first great loop, gathering force from many other rivers to crash with monstrous violence down the falls. We drove once to the shores. We drove once to the source of the Zambezi, the family silent in the massive trees, squelching a little in the fibrous moss until we saw it fiercely welling out as clear as diamond in the close green light. Do we do wrong to seek our birthplaces? Do we do wrong to seek out birthplaces, a sin to gaze upon our origins? Are we the heirs of Ham and Oedipus, escaped like Mwindo, Moses, and Sanzang down the great river of all-washing time? The Lunga was a branch of the Zambezi, itself fed by the lesser Luakera. Our village lay upon its gentle vale. My first poem, lost now, had a line, the rushing, gushing river that sparkles in the sun. I taught myself to swim in it. Sometimes the bank was thick with yellow butterflies. I loved the way the current bore me on. Was it the bank that moved so fast, or I? For me, the water did not move at all, unless I tried to beat against the stream. Was Heraclitus right? I later asked. For once you float, it's always the same river, and the banked past would never cease to be. Pardon the puns, they're part of this odd story. The current time deplores their currency, their lack of backing in a standard gold, their arbitrary adventitiousness, semantic incest justified by fiat, their base coinage fueled by Gresham's law, their correspondence masked as derivation, their plausive lie like rhyme and anagram. But do I not now beat against the river? If time's indeed a branched and branching river, a double tree of causes and effects, why may not wordplay word its wildness well? Perhaps this incest is the nicest science. We live It lived in 4 grass huts. I watched them build, reaching up bales of straw to set the thatch. Vic helped and learned, and afterwards they talked, cross-legged and chuckling, leaning against the poles, the scent of woodbines smoky in the air, a crate of castle lager from the shade, men drinking after work as evening fell. Vic's Gooden Dembu was a bit antique, from Charlie White's old grammar from the teens, and in the first days they would laugh at him. White's field work had described the Ndembu clans, and Vic at first would ask folk which they were. They'd think a bit, remember, and look puzzled, keep a straight face and tell him courteously. Vic was aware that something was amiss. His nickname, Sanyunyachi, was too grand to suit the tone they'd struck. It would translate as Father of the Clans. Later, he found that clans went out of vogue 10 years ago. So much for ancient tribal practices. These chaps were humans and not archetypes. When we would drive the 10 miles to the town, we'd always pick up every hitchhiker, and we would sit or lean against the cab, and we would always sing. The song just then concerned a local thief, Winston Carrero, who'd stolen all the money in a pot that Mr. Nightingale, the missionary, had safely buried in his sleeping hut. Hey, yo, Carrero, they would sing. Poor Mr. Nightingale no understand the bank. Some bits of the Ndembu wit I got, some only after 10 or 20 years. So language making turns to anecdotes, to jokes and instances and travelers' tales. Those nuggets we deploy to goose a conversation and shape the self that tells them afterwards. It's by such memes the language reproduces, memory making members of itself. As when Musona, our all-patient cook, misheard the recipe that Edie gave him for good steamed pudding nicely laced with jam, we wanting some reminder of old England. Rub it in paper, Edie said, and he heard pepper, with results you can imagine. Today the dish might be considered chic. Language, I would learn then, if not before, invents and uses us for its inventions. Or in the tree that overlooked our camp, I saw a bright green mamba on the crotch, one branch below, between me and the ground. Musona now took charge and calmed me down, made me inch outward on my limb until my weight had bent it earthwards. I could hang and drop down into his waiting arms. To go out on a limb is not so bad when Eve's green friend is coiled about the tree. We are not doomed always by our former choices. I sorrowed when he killed it with a hoe. Bobby was my conspirator and friend. Each night we'd whisperingly tell together, masked by the village drums and firelit songs, the great moon rocket epic, with its wars gazillion billion miles away in space, and the strange planets with their teratorns and lumbering golgoromps and red-eyed grems. But we were tender-hearted, having slain 10,000 enemies in death ray battles and pitied their poor families till we wept. And so we came up with our great invention, the friendly ray, that turns a foe to friend, and amped up to the highest setting, could bring the dead back to life, relieved and grateful. Bobby was now a scientist already. Collecting flowers, he pressed them in a book. Years later, faded petals, insubstantial, would float out from a long unopened story, and stick them with their genus and their species in his small and stick them with their genus and their species in his small treatise on Rhodesian plants. I lived less fastened to reality and fortified a giant termite hill with battlements and weapons of defense. But thus I learned the termite hierarchy, the delegation of the hill's main tasks. and watched them war against the driver ants. And with my friends, a gang of village boys, we took our part as apex predators and munched the juicy queens when they would swarm. Bobby and I shared in our finest work, damming a little stream, the Narofanta. We shaped a lakeland network of canals and waterfalls that made a tiny music, built villages from the blue local clay, planted it all with flowers and twiggy trees, and added a small working water mill, the muddiest children then in Africa. Our branching stories, Bob's taxonomies, my mamba tree with its forbidden crotch, the termite order of command, the flow of water through our tiny tributaries, all these, I think, together with the grammar that Edie taught us as we learned to read, cohered into my deepest metaphor, the tree of life, the tree of how to know. Memory surges now harder and harder. The tree branches, twigs turn to fertile limbs. The story I'd begun is getting lost, losing itself in stories of their own. How to continue this investigation borne backwards by the current of a life? What am I seeking with this anyway? Because all this, the splendid thunderstorms, rainbows above the brachystegias, the little gang of Lunda boys I joined, led by my quiet and noble friend Sakeru, who taught me trap making and archery, the dirty jokes of dear fat Samawika, fire creeping through the gold savannah as the beaters, cheerful, let it do no harm, that game might have green pasture in the spring, the wings of water beating from our ankles, wading across the rapids of Zambezi, three children naked in clear racing sluices, the orchid paradises on the river's islands, Vic and I running, laughing, chased by hornets. My job delousing the two oxen hired by Edie when she tried to plow a field, my huge pals Pendeka and Ndeleke, to get rice farming going for the village, the crate of books that came in every month that we devoured, word-hungry cannibals, bread spread with lemon melon jam I'd eat, leaning against the tent wall with a book, the monstrous visions in the fever dream when I came down with the malaria. In silent forests, neon blue irises, the valleys crimson scarlet with wild cannas, the taste of all the Lunda fruits, the mucha, the sour nshindwa, the fragrant guava, the deep sweet mangoes of Chibuakata, because all this, I know, contains the pith of some idea that might have power to heal, some enterprise an old man might propose for a new world that soon will be without him. Part of that meaning I already knew. What Vic and Edie came to see in time was that this Lunda and Dembu world was not at bottom one of status, wealth, and power, as orthodox red doctrine had maintained, but was a live, contentious work of spirit, whose master symbols, wakened in their rites, were gates between the present and the past, and more between the all and what's to come. Their word for master symbol, sacrament, was hard to grasp at first. Chijikijilu. It literally means the blaze you cut, the landmark you create to not get lost when entering an unknown territory. I had been lost. I had been lost. One day I'd wandered off and lost my bearings in the great savannah. Terror came then, like black shade over all. I knew that if a leopard didn't get me, the ants would. When exhausted, I must sleep. At random, I struck out, heart in my mouth, and I was lucky, recognized a tree, and got back safe and didn't say a word. So if I'd cut a blaze then, with my knife, I might have known, and that new territory might have been claimed as safe for me, and I a finder for my tribe, discoverer. Its fruit trees and its game might have been ours. I came to see that words could be a blaze that carries us beyond the scope of words, renders the unsaid said. I came to see the world as a great game whose boundary, the present moment, now enclosed all the past time there was, the precipice whence all things, all new things, precipitate and spring. So a Chijikijilu was the gate, the metaphor, the thrown together symbol, wherewith the world daily invents itself. Later I saw this marker as the trace, the place from which one past becomes a many, the species branch in Bob's taxonomies, the tree crotch with its choice alternatives, the river with its blue distributaries. Much later still, the flow of information as entropy explores affordance space. Still, this was all to come. Another gift to be unpacked was given me back then. Vic had to drive 300 dirt road miles to get supplies, and he took me along. And somewhere near Solwezi, we drove through a grove of wild plum trees, heavy with fruit, those sweet, sour, tiny plums I still remember. And then it came, a pure astonishment. Everything seemed to glow in all its detail, in all its perfect detail in the light. The fruit, the flowered grass, striated bark, the various leaves, all perfectly constructed. I knew enough of cell biology that this degree of order went right down to molecules, atomic particles, insanely, gloriously meticulous. To build one leaf from scratch would take a nation its GDP for 30 years, I thought. And there it all was, given to us freely. A further thought of even greater wonder, the I, the inner one that sees all this, it's given too, this Fredness, this idea. Nobody ever noticed this, I thought. I'm going to have to find a way to tell it. 3. Rini was maybe 3 when we first came. They named the poor girl Nyamahemba, meaning she who cries and must be carried, but soon she became for me a mystery. Elvish or pixie-ish, her girly mischief was somehow deeper than our doggish boyness, and she befriended Dora, a deaf mute, and widely thought to be a changeling or half-wit, with her sallow-faced remoteness. Rini and she became inseparable. How they communicated, I don't know. A kind of body language, quick and secret, so perfectly and clearly understood. In later years, Rini would teach dyslexics, famously dropped to head level with them. She taught one girl to read in just 2 hours. I watched. That girl now has a PhD. So, how does muteness bud out into speech? For me, it had to do with femaleness. Edie had taught me grammar's subtle muscles, the colors of the words, the dance of letters, the tree of syntax and its melody. But there was something holy, something dreadful about the crotch, the place of branching where ever dwells its emerald green snake. Once, in a village, some Ndembu boys took me to see a little girl who liked to show hers to the little boys. I fled, but I remembered Christine in the bushes and knew that this atrocity was sacred. I had a dream then about circumcision. Ndembu boys must undergo mukanda, where in a thorn bush boma in the trees, the boys are stripped and painted so grotesquely their very mothers wouldn't recognize them, and are instructed by the gruff old men, and then must suffer in their own dark crotch, and so become a man and be reborn. I dreamed then that I had suffered all, and now was brought to me a dark-skinned girl, dressed all in white and lovely, for my bride, whom I must serve, and she would be my friend. And so my language formed within my cells, and so it was the language formed me there? Or was it that the language formed me there? Vic read to us each night in the soft roar that kept the tilly mantle glowing white. The actress' son, he voiced the characters, and so I hear them still. But then again, the hours I spent leaning against the tent, rereading all those half-grasped magic stories, were forming live scars on my synapses, and thus the gene expression of my I. Nada the Lily, Alan Quatermain, Kim, Kidnapped, Tarzan, Peter Pan, Coral Island, Treasure Island, of course the requisite Swiss Family Robinson, 39 Steps and Gallant Greenmantle, Cannery Row, Midshipman Hornblower, The Jungle Books, White Fang, Call of the Wild, and Conrad yearning for the Isle of Java, Orlando with his brothers in exile, Professor Challenger in his lost world, and Prince Hal grieving for his fallen foe, and Dejah Thoris in her silks and furs, dreaming upon her love as her swift flyer sped through the thin air of the dying planet. A shocking diet for a young red mind. What were they thinking? There was not a book that should not now be banned in all good schools. Ah, yes, explorers have a tarnished name. We should do what society demands. We should fit into the ecology. But what can I be other than myself? I, an invasive species, am a stranger wherever I take root. And I don't mind as long as I am sovereign of my mind. In every school they sent me to, I chafed. I would bug out at recess and walk home. I bit no other teachers, though, thank God. The time had come to leave my Africa. In Cape Town, where we stayed a while, I saw something that hammered in my strangerhood. Mummy and I were in the upper deck of the red bus that I would take to school, and as we stopped outside a prison yard, I saw 2 guards beat a black prisoner. Already I mistrusted white-skinned people. In remote villages, the children sometimes screamed and hid to see 3 little ghosts, all white, climb from the truck as if they were alive, proving that children too could die like old ones. Was I a ghost? The real warm people I had known in Munilunga all were brown, with shiny shins and lovely curly hair, and laughed and sang and smelt like good thick honey. And the sly old wizard Samatamba would invite me to his big hut where his wives plied me with honey beer with bees in it. And that was real and human as it should be. When we got back to England, I would pine for 7 years at losing Africa, and only words, the poems I was writing, could bring it back, make me myself again. We lived in cold and soot-caked Manchester, post-war and socialist, beneath the shadow always of the bomb. All through the winters, I never had warm feet. The condensation running down the windows of the bus that took me to my school was pungent yellow, stank with the nicotine of others' lungs. One night, my first friends there ganged up on me. I'd passed the 11 plus, but they had not, and beat me up outside our Boy Scout hut. A freckled stranger everywhere, I've seen it come in every new home that was not a home. In Winilunga, where a cruel old woman teased me to violence, and I wept and struck, and Edie beat me publicly, and shame has since become my portal to renewal, and in Ndola, where white neighbor boys set on their strongest fighter and then watched until on my back, but punching still, they left me laughing. And in Cape Town, when for a fight I won, they would blame me. In Manchester, defending Bobby, who was maybe even weirder than I. At grammar school, it fell on someone else, Goda, the Jew, the soppy, sad-faced kid. I, for my heart just ached, stood up for him. Vic's public story was communitas, the warm equality of mutual trust, the sacred siblinghood that overcomes the cold structures of status, wealth, and rank. His thought is core to all communities that speak out against inequality. He forged a family with real love, but he was fatherless, a unicorn, the Dürer knight, death at his saddle bow, the Peter Pan who flew but never could return to that dear bedroom that he left. He always felt outside and looking in. I've known what might be called the business end of that communitas, that dear Gemeinschaft. I saw small girls peck deaf-mute Dora raw. I saw the little boys at school pass round a bootlegged copy of the scenes at Auschwitz to all my friends who wish that I would join some commune in consensus. Sorry, I am damaged goods. I'm yours, but not your clan's. Or so a later story that I told myself explained what I've become. Perhaps more likely, my fancy language learned out of the books persuaded other kids that I was snooty, trying to claim a place I didn't merit. And this big, pudgy, awkward, freckled boy was an excrescence from an alien world, or worse, gone over to the enemy, the parents' generation and its rules. Did they believe that I was laughing at them? Perhaps I was the hostile one who breaks the dear communion of humanity. I paint myself the victim, and I see there is no cruelty like that of a victim. And all this I see now was liberation. My soul need not be socially constructed. At base, I have no need of validation. I will help out, but I will not be owned. My gaucheness, clumsy linkishness, my folly, my blinkeredness against conspiracies, my tendency to blurt out what I think, all these from time to time have torn from me my self-respect and left me naked, shamed. And then in nakedness alone and shame can I true feel the miracle of the world. Identity for me is not wherein I share, but where I differ from all roots that grew in me. And friends I did have, one-on-one, wherever there was time to get to know somebody. Of course, Sakeru, with his wise brown eyes, teaching me how to make and shoot a bow, roasting a goat's head on an open fire, the muscles of the ear, the choicest part. Lynn Carnason in Cape Town, hand in hand, we'd close our eyes and teleport to Mars and open them to look into each other, into each other's. Her dad, another Fred, would be arrested and be a prisoner of the treason trials. And Vic brought him a coat and chocolate when he was stuck in jail and bitter cold. And gentle, sly, slim Walker, Johnny Clark, with whom I peeled with sunburn in Provence and hitchhiked over Europe in our teens. The funniest of all, John Derbyshire, John Levi, comically lugubrious, and Ted Holt with his splendid foreign accents, and Lucy Bate, and Joe, and black-eyed Sophie. But all these friendships were, it seems to me, outside the crowd and in parentheses, hitchhiker friendships, instant recognitions, island shards of a shattered continent. None was a damned compact majority, Vic's phrase, quoted from his beloved Ibsen. But doesn't language hold us all together, for better or for worse, and then divide us with misologic, vicious coinages, the surfacings of ancient crimes and lies? How can the poet purify the tribe? How can the soul find its true poetry? This book is not about a person's life, to make the point again. It is a voyage of discovery, to find the secret source whereby all language irrigates the world, the act of generation and the crotch where budding meaning bursts out from the past. in one man's life, the details not important except as pointers to the lives of others. My alienations may be served the purpose of isolation for experiment, removing certain social explanations for the deep mystery that we all endure. Perhaps it's not society that makes our meanings, casts them into words. Perhaps our language generates our lives. It's thought, each conversation that we have, each word a neuron in its vast old brain, each usage but the firing of a synapse, and our societies consume the meanings and turn them into tools and ads and jails. By language, I mean not just words, but music, dance and image, homely recipes, temples and games and stages. It's the garden that must be always lost if it would grow. I always stammered when I was a child. I knew the word was there but would not come, and so I came to feel it as a presence, perhaps as artists know the noble image embedded in the stone or floating there upon the empty canvas or the stage, or as the mystics know the voice of God. Something had happened there in Africa. The brave young communists, that loving pair, the dialectical materialists, the cynics about status, rank, and power, the class warriors and lovers of the people, had found the people knew some things they didn't and operated from another world entirely. And Ndembu people lived a world of spirits. No, not Platonic forms, which after all are only jumped up generalizations, but vital whorls of deep embodied meaning, dim currents of intentionality, lit by the dwelling presence of the dead. And in our rites and holidays, the living may turn to that living story and be healed. Time was not then an exile from the real, but was reality itself, not ruled by an external law, but law creating, not teleological, but teleogenic. Persons were not results of social forces, or in their hearts members of race or class. Structure was blessed by laughing anti-structure. There was authority that was not power, or status, rank, or birth, or privilege, that need not be sadistic or unjust. There was a space where humans, face to face, could see themselves each in the other's eyes. And I had my vision of the plum trees that was a dagger in the heart of any philosophy of mechanistic order, that revealed nature supernaturing, and what I later phrase as the divine embodied in its own metabolism. Meanwhile, we joined the Manchester campaign for nuclear disarmament. We painted signs and decorated floats, and Edie was the local secretary. And I remember one great rally there, the march, the speeches, the camaraderie. And though I tried to smile and feel the comfort of being where everybody thought the same, I sensed some cold inhuman stink in it, not the dear smell of human sweat and hair, but some metallic, alien, rotten thing, some foul dishonesty or cruelty masked over by its solidarity. There was a monstrous woman, Molly Mandel, who ran the party headquarters in Salford and scared me with her niceness and her rage. Edie found out the funding came from Moscow, and Stalin's tanks roared into Budapest. And so we sought in wintry Manchester some echo of the true communitas we knew in Zambia, and so we found, of all the many Christianities, the one most pagan and most ritual, most incarnational, the Catholic Church. Morning Mass in the icy smog of Stockport, breakfastless visions of the nave consumed in the green tendrils of the growing spirit, the infinite gravity of the host within, sucking all selfness towards its heart. Ah, Mass indeed, whither all light was drawn. And new vocabularies opened up within that strange book of the Catechism, the bright upright orthogonals of Thomas, the shame-blessed inner turnings of Augustine, the tears of pierced Sir Teresa and Ignatius, and Hopkins, overwhelming to this poet, word mystic, wing of universe wild wheeling, his Celtic lilt, his Anglo-Saxon bones, his ancient echo of Latinity. At school, John Armstrong, maestro, my true maestro, led me through Milton, Shakespeare, Eliot, and so emerged my next consuming thought. It was of time itself, that every question could be pursued into the most fertile ground if we could find right words to speak of time. Milton was asking, how did time begin? Shakespeare, how time created and destroyed. Eliot, how time could damn or save the soul. And my first take on it, I think, was quite mistaken. Time hath transfixed the flourish set on youth, wrote Shakespeare, and I saw the rebus in it. Youth's vast last looped H, shorn by time's axial scythe. Time was the enemy that poets fought. But what I did not see was that the spear that pierces beauty is what makes its meaning. By time is conquered time, said Eliot, and Milton's fall becomes the whole world's spring. A Christianity that Plato formed then ruled my passions for a dozen years, and he, born inter facies et urinam, was hidden from me by eternity. The word I sought was yet to come to me. So far, I've had to dig to excavate the well of memories, but now the flow has broadened to a rush. So what to do? Cap off the gusher? Just let it pour on? What to choose first? What was the big idea that all this served? Already we agreed that this is not autobiography. What then? Write it all down in the hope that something will emerge that's worth the keeping? Do I now even have the time, for life might be outpaced by my recording of it, and my intent be trapped like Tristram Shandy's? I must be faithful to this form, if yet I cannot say I fully comprehend it. Though true, I chose this journey of research into a man's own pattern of thought words, this exploration into meaning making, this sketch not of the world, but how it's known. Why write down all the details anyway? What need if God remembers everything, even my inmost thoughts? The job's been done. Or if we learn to data mine the past, for information cannot be destroyed and is in principle recoverable. Each spot of time may then be resurrected in its immediacy and be relived. If neither, then of course we're for the dark. Maybe a collage then of little scenes in which each clip illuminates a word. But then the task is left up to the reader, and I'm not inclined to bore my friends with travel anecdotes, magazine poetry. The task is then to choose to shape a whole, to paint a picture, not a photograph. The next 300 lines then brook a flood in which 4 big things happened, big for me. I got an education, found Mei Lin, discovered my much loved America, and started writing real poetry. But at the heart of all of it was love. Our little living room in Cheadle Hulme, coal glowing in the grate, the story time, Vic doing all the voices, then to bed. Saturday mornings, Bob and I made tea and toast with fragrant marmalade and bore it upstairs to where our sweetheart parents lay. We'd get the bus up to the Pennine valleys, climb till the land of Lancashire lay out below us. Then, snug by a cliff, we'd eat cheese and tomato sandwiches for lunch, find our own slope of thickly laden briars, and pick the blackberries till we were purple, and spend the evening boiling down the jam, and then the next installment of the story. These were the years of The Lord of the Rings. Vic read it all to us at least 3 times. It's still for me a grand account of love. It was the love of man for man as brothers. It was the animating fire between a woman and a man, ennobling both. It was the love of places and their spirits, and of all good and useful tools and dwellings. I'd learned to love, but soon another kind of love, another meaning of the word, rose on the odd horizon of my mind. This was the 60s and the age of Elvis, the age of the iconic girl, the girl of dreams, the secret path to paradise, the age of not quite going all the way, the age of the poor lover's moon-calf bellow, the ballad on its way to rock and roll, the sweet slope leading to the bacchanal, the Eden Garden years before the fall into the throbbing underworld of Woodstock. Love then was everywhere, and how could I distinguish what was true from what was silly? A pious youth, I spent those years in struggle against the riotous junket of the loins. It sounds so silly now to love adventure, but errantry was my romance for years, and still is if the honest truth be told. How can to err mean also to have an errand? The whole endeavor here is such a thing, a search for what there is to rightly search, a prophecy of what to prophesy, a quest to find what meaning might well mean, a venture dans les pays de l'aventure. In earlier years, I'd hitchhiked up to Scotland, sleeping in porches when the night dew fell, learning from drivers how to guddle trout and muckle on a dreichet day, seeing the blue loch between pouring crags, taking the short cut up the foggy moor to come down to the croft and the peat fire. So I knew how to live rough and to sleep when sleep came on me, and to eat what's given. But now the big one called, America. I flew to California in the year between my school and university, hearing Moon River breathing through the cabin, joining the family in Palo Alto, and so began my romance with the road, either with friends or in beat-up cars or buses, sharing the driving, or just on the thumb, alone on highways, in the joy or fear of those mood changes like cloud shadows passing over the hillsides as the trucks howled by. I was a plagiarist of Kerouac, I guess, but once I hitched from Leon to New York, camped by a deep South rural brothel where one black Samaritan came out and warned me that I might get my throat cut and should leave. So I had put some ante in the game. Youth, youth. But as the dialects sang on, the inner continent grew vaster, stranger. I wrote a little epic, a dream vision, sent it to C.S. Lewis, who wrote back the perfect letter to a crazed young poet, suggesting, as Keats wrote to Shelley once, that I should curb my magnanimity. Alas, I tried. I still possess that letter, but I was in the pride and shame of youth. It's somewhere in a suitcase, just as well. One summer in the redwood-scented attic of our old rental on Embarcadero, I translated Book 6 of the Aeneid, translating it into American, when Bob would spell me grinding out the mirror of his 6-inch reflecting telescope, using the Foucault test to gauge the surface, getting it down to 1/8 of a wave. In England, we'd constructed model aircraft, drawing the wing form to the formulae, slotting the spars across the rigid formers in airy balsa stuck with pungent glue, flying our gliders in the skies of Cheshire under a very different shade of blue. Bob always measured twice and cut but once. I always cut and made mistakes and measured. I found out Virgil's meter by my errors. Bob one day would invent fMRI. When I record this, memory takes root and puts out leaves and flowers that are so sweet they shock me with their detail and their sharpness. But would a reader feel the meaning too? You have your own strange island continents. Why look at others' photos secondhand? Is there something in the very language that is alive and breathes a second life in both scribe and reader? And does verse, with its reverses every breath and line, match some deep clocking key within the brain that can release the flow of memory? Later in life, I and my science friends would make much of this first obscure perception and hone the mirror to a finer wave. Later, we'd find the formula for the wing. But I was writing now. First, purple prose that was a crude way to remind myself of some loved place or time and give it life. Then free verse with its looser way with words that sometimes hit a sweet spot in the nerve, but always fell apart like yeastless bread or cardboard wetted in the rain of time, or teenage love that feels so permanent and fades, as my friend Semir Zeki shows, when dopamine and vasopressin sour. Slowly, I taught myself to write in form. At that time, had no masters for a guide. Meter and rhyme were for the ears of childhood, the childhood of the person and the race. At worst, the lower races we must raise, noblesse oblige out of the swamps of chant. Of course, I'd heard Vic's sweet and subtle beat, catching the life of Shakespeare in his lines, the rhymes in the outdated reading books, and the demotic forms of rock and country. But all that was reactionary pap. I must defy my times to be a poet and take the fool's role of the silly rhymer. And as I learned to love, I learned to write in forms that hooked the meanings all together within the chance constraints of sound and stress. Meaning became incarnate in the verse, as love becomes incarnate in a kiss. I first met Mei Lin in a library. Tired of preparing for my lit prelims, I started on a sonnet on the spin of stars and planets as we turn at night, and on the rising of the sun and moon. And there she was. My then girlfriend had brought her, curious to know what she would think of this mad and naive young poet she had acquired. Chivalry ruled. I must not stare at her, nor think of her other than as a friend, but later I would realize she fit the dream from 10 years back, the dark-skinned lady brought to me in that torchlit place where I must undergo the ritual of manhood and be the kind protector of her shrine. Once Jean had left me, like an idiot, I'd turned away her offer of her body out of religious scruple and the fear that I might poison something in the future, and sensibly she had dropped me like a brick. I started to embarrass poor Mei Lin with visits, invitations, and concern. She was hospitable, but quite as prudish as that chaste, half-embarrassed lover who called upon her in her college room and drank her tea and talked about Fellini and toasted scones on her electric fire. The best was always, then as it is now, that we would laugh together at the world, how beautiful she was and is. She never knew it. Her eye and wit are both exact and ruthless, her loyalty and truth unwavering. Her tact is sadly, honestly transparent, her taste unconscious, odd but quite unerring. Her love's old, strong, half hidden from herself, a pessimist where I'm an optimist, Chinese in her pragmatic realism, British in her delight in the absurd, a sane, ironic Oxford liberal, a soul of undemonstrative compassion, one of the funniest people I have known, a human in the full sense of the word. When Mei Lin's in a room, the colors thicken, Around her moves a complex scalar field. To find their fit, proportions shift and quicken, such is the force a being like hers can wield. Those billioned memories, that attitude, that density of time must bend the world so that the mass of things becomes renewed and flat trajectories are shaped and curled. A soft Gauss crackles even when she sits reading where none can see her, deep within the dark event horizon of her wits. The world lines gather and turn outside in, and a new world begins to synthesize, out of which looks a pair of clear brown eyes. That's how I put it 30 years since then, 26 years ago. She formed my word no less than did those years in Africa. Words mean through love, or else they have no meaning. Even the words of hatred yearn for something. The sweet revenge, the scragging of the hated, the dark communion with the enemy. Words mean through love. If you would teach an AI how to mean, first it must learn to love. To love is to intend. To know, as in the Bible, is to make love to that which you would know. And love is pain. At first we had agreed that we're merely friends and colleagues. Don't think you can make light of Aphrodite. She sees through all of that and takes revenge. So when she mentioned that her boyfriend, Peter, at Cambridge, had invited her to visit, I, as the very parfait chevalier, offered to take her over in my car. Such anguishes of jealousy, such fears that where I'd truly garnered up my soul was closed to me and I must be abandoned. She broke up with him there and didn't tell me. Poor fool, in grief amid the apple blossom. We married in St. Aloysius Church, the Oxford Oratory, just across Woodstock Road from the old Lamb and Flag where Vic and Edie had married secularly in the war. The choir of the Schola Cantorum sang Surge propera amica mea, and our reception, all was given us by friends and loving sympathizers, was in the Christ Church lodgings of the Dean, where Lewis Carroll's Alice once peered through the tiny door into the lovely garden. Registered at the rather posh hotel on the sweet Wye upstream from Tintern Abbey, as Mr. Turner and his lady Mrs. Turner, we were both scared that first night of our journey. Two foolish virgins stumbling into fate, two prudes who caught each other's eye at dinner and started giggling uncontrollably. 3 days later, taking a corner fast around a headland in Green, County Cork, I realized this person next to me was my responsibility and I was hers forever, and we hardly knew each other. So we had meant to do what we had done, but did not know at all what thing it was. That standing at the altar before friends, clothed in new, unaccustomed garments, the giving of the little golden ring, the speaking of the self-performing words were certainly referring, but to what? Something that was not yet, that would emerge out of the nonsense place that was the future, making two new beings who would grow up into men and change the world. We had carved our blaze upon the edge of time. I wrote my dissertation in that year on time and Shakespeare and defended it in '67. I was 23. I had begun it, though I didn't know what it would be, when I was 17. And my great English teacher, John Armstrong, had put together in my mind the four quartets, the early sonnets and the Winter's Tale. Eliot and Shakespeare both were struggling to understand the paradox of time, time the destroyer and creator, time whose very edge is being. That edge I saw up on that crag in Ireland with my wife. I'd had my moment of Othello's grief, Leontes' pain, the barren outcast male, Eliot's wasteland of abandonment, Hopkins's cliffs of fall, frightful, unfathomed. What miracle might my new friend beside me charm forth for my redemption after all? I turn my glass and give my scene such growing as you had slept between, says Time the chorus. Music, awake, bequeath to death your numbness, says wise Paulina as the old man weeps. This is an art that nature makes. Time the destroyer is the creator too. Only through time, time is conquered. This then would be my theme. What if the beauty of all art and nature were but the promise of time's more unfolding? Is human history the further birth of nature and the ongoing birth of God? So evolution was slow poetry, and poetry the swiftest evolution. But isn't time the place of tragedy? And let me explain a word that I use fairly close to the beginning of this section. It's the Greek word kairos, which means the moment of opportunity, the moment where time branches out before us and we choose a branch, as opposed to old chronos, chronological time, just moving on um, uh, forever. Part 5. 39 years ago, my father died. Each year about this time, I walk about nervous, dejected, with an edge of temper, not that first stinging heart shock of the grief, as I drove reckless those 400 miles, my son beside me through the winter hills, but as if I had lost something and forgotten that I had lost it and was quite at fault. Pick up the threads, Fred, of that former time, when Vic was flying high on his ideas, when, walking on the beach, he shared with me his grand philosophy of passage and of peril, the powers of the weak, the strange communion that undergirds the structures of mere power. How then we hit upon communitas as what it was Edie was driving at. My word was comitatus, which I got from Beowulf and its interpreters, but that was not quite it. The boon companions' fellowship on the benches of Valhalla still waited on the great ring giver's will, still had command of women and of carls. Misrule was closer. Shakespeare's golden world, with its mind-twisting masks and revelations, Orsino sorrowing with Cesario, Falstaff's rude travesty of his young prince, the comate brotherhood of Arden Forest, the solstices and equinoxes where the ancient powers rise and dance in us. That was the English of the Lunda rites, Kankanga and Isoma and Mukanda, where individuality emerged out of the death of status, wealth, and power into the old communion of our species, the old community of men and women. And I, obsessed with time, now saw that we, within our arts of ritual and poem, could make a kairos where the line of hours could split into its many might have beens, and they could dance together and be real. This story I'm now telling buds so quickly, bursting out thoughts and possibilities, memories clothing out themselves in sound and color, even the cold knock of pebbles beneath us by the growling winter sea, that I must tie it back to its first plan, knit back the kairos to the daily fabric. Don't let the best be enemy to the good. Don't let the moment in and out of time divorce itself from time, the grand creator. Don't bar the beasts and kings and shepherds from the starlit gift work of Epiphany. We lived in a thatched cottage for a year. The place was called Marsh Bolden, kid you not. A friend had lent it to us while he's gone, and in the interlude of pastoral I wrote, and Malin taught, and we were happy. We haunted an abandoned country house whose noble grounds the great Brown had designed, and ate a picnic where the prospect ran down to the shining serpent of the Thames. In winter, huddled round the fire with friends, we dined on leg of lamb with rosemary and talked of love and of discovery. Time's speech as chorus in the winter's tale became my pattern for philosophy, denying Plato's rude critique of time as but a copy of eternity, denying also Newton's praise of time as the unchanging frame of everything. Time, Shakespeare came to see, was not the death of beauty and of spirit, but their source. Time was the only home of supernature, nature its own true supernaturing, and physics was the home of metaphysics, existence but the process of transcending. Thus, art was not the foisting upon things of an idea, but things ideas themselves. For nature is made better by no mean, but nature makes that mean. So over that art which you say adds to nature is an art that nature makes. You see, sweet maid, we marry a gentler scion to the wildest stock, and make conceive a bark of baser kind by bud of nobler race. This is an art which does mend nature, change it rather, but the art itself is nature. In these words, many years later, I would challenge those who see humanity as nature's scourge, rejecting any human graft on life as not a thing that nature makes itself. All nature is a grafting. Art is nature, self-propagating it by other means. The means of reproduction are its meaning, referring just the high physics of light. Fact is not correspondence, but a bond. Truth is but treeness, as the word contains the branching of the many from the one. My new degree brought us to California, eager to staff its universities. We settled into Santa Barbara as the United States went through one of its periodic revolutions. You can't step into the same river twice. My world dissolved and changed. One stormy day, as a great weather system rolled across from the immense Pacific, I saw something that made me question all that I had known. Our son had just been born. On Highway 1, driving them home, a mountain range rose up behind the known crest of La Cumbre Peak, blue-gray and unimaginably vast. Now, had my thoughts been on the time and place and not the shocking beauty of my baby, I should have known it was the wave of cloud that lately rained on us and then swept east. But for a few seconds I saw the world as a vast stage set, just a pasteboard mask, the demiurge's palpable illusion. Were those eyes by my side, now closed in sleep, some kind of overload upon the system that would reveal the inner truth of things? There'd been a moment in the Cuba crisis when I'd misheard a news report and knew that soon the mushroom cloud would rise above Tom Tower's cupola towards Bryce Norton, and asked my Oxford friends to drink sherry and watch the very ending of the world. But that was not the same. This was a question about the fictiveness of everything, the odd, sweet paranoia that we see today among the Gnostic mobs who know that this is all a matrix or a hoax, the coming rapture or the caliphate. But then, when there is nothing there but tinsel, we still should choose the real from the false. If nothing matters, everything must matter. If we're deceived, let's love our fellow fools. But living that way, as I did for years in that weird paradise of California, where flowers overwhelmed our little shack, overlooking the city to the ocean, the pepper tree shading the cedar deck, required a philosophic discipline that forced the forming of my poet's task. Had I become an existentialist? The fallacies of existentialism, or so I came to see it, were that it divided far too sharply mind and matter, giving to matter all the power of cause, and to the whim the only liberty. The stranger's language of existence cast him into a world that was a mere machine, exiled in what he did not know was home. That way was not for me, I had decided. For me, nature was matter come alive, a world of fierce intentionality, whose folds had flamed and given birth to love. The heavenly glory of the mosques and temples, the shrines and the cathedrals were not false, though kindled, yes, by complex chemistry, engendered by the enzymes and the nerves, and paid for by an economic system. They were a truth that had been brought to being that was as sound as quarks and molecules, and history is nature supernatured. And I remembered on the ship Tali how I had made the world split into two by pressing on my eyeball, how that time in Africa I'd seen the world as made, self-made indeed, but we were also makers. We were the neurons of a fetal God, together with all living, sensing creatures, and every atom, every particle, and time was but the shape of its gestation. And church began to seem far, far too small to deal with such conceptions. And the days of Bach and Michelangelo and Shakespeare, of Gautama, Muchona, and Lao Tzu, who saw it rightly, now could not return. In telling this, I find I'm forced to use language and vision forged in later times, so this account is partial forgery. Much was inchoate, only realized in my year of the garden 8 years thence, but now I see just where its seeds were sown. Driving on Alameda Padre Serra down to the university, I heard the era's music on the radio promise a stranger vision of the world, a whiter shade of pale, strawberry fields, if not for you, or I shall be released. I swear I wasn't doing drugs. No need. The vertigo was sweet but dangerous, a terror at the heart of revelation, a metaphysical euphoria that changed the world into a sudden shade. Malin was sick, and neither of us knew it. Sweet 60s turned to bitter 70s. I had seen friendship curdle into faction. I had seen ideology once more glare from the human face with that bright stare as mindless as a strident cockerel's. I had heard phrases oozing with intention poison the language with mendacity. I had seen mobs of students and police sadistically bruise each other's faces, ignorance governing and wisdom smeared. Mei Lin was diagnosed and healed, but now she seemed to hollow out and lose direction. We sat despairing in the golden dusk, amid the fragrance of 1,000 flowers, watching the lights go on across a city that had become for us a state of exile, stuck in a place that lost a stupid war. We'd lost our faith, faith in the human race, faith in the past, the nation and the church, faith in ourselves, almost in one another. Daniel, the only anchor of our lives. What fools we were! What lucky, silly fools! We turned back east and started up again, buried in an outdated college town. It was as if we'd hid ourselves in leaves, where the cocosing winds around the hill and a great plane tree shades the grocery store. I taught, and Malin ran a theatre, and Sharp and I revived the old review. I settled in to write a book a year. We had our second son. I learned to teach. Winter and spring, summer and orange fall. We drew the plans and built a house and garden. We hosted vinous lunches in the flowers, shaded by that great beech tree by the path. And in the winter snow I split huge logs and fed the dark glow of the iron stove. We live so many lives now. This is new. A human in the 14th century, of the time of Jesus or of Sargon, could live but one. Perhaps an exiled poet or a silk merchant trading to Siam, or a sad princess married to a Turk, or a slave captured in a raid might know more than one world, but this was rare. A man's or woman's life was one brief arch, and each was a professional in it. We moderns, though, are gifted amateurs in everything and camp out in our times, our academic tribe especially. If you're a camper, then a good tent's wanted, and my tent was the canopy of words, the shaman's the shaman's pole of meter braced with rhyme, the pegs of image, and the canvas text of grammar, logic, voice, and emphasis. But for a while at Kenyon we were home. I read voraciously science and religion, fiction, linguistics and philosophy, nature and nurture, art and evolution, and started my long dive in economics. One year, the US bicentennial, I woke each morning in a state of joy and taught the classics of 6 disciplines and wrote till I could write no more, weeded or dug, invented a religion, cooked sometimes with my homemade pesto sauce. I put it all in lyrics, aphorisms, and essays that would find an audience. And next year I became a citizen, and we conceived, unknown, our second son. Then should one celebrate one's own good luck? The temper of our times is to mistrust it. But blessings should be taken in as blessings, and thanks should find a target for their thanks. Call no man happy, said old Aeschylus, but having once been happy is a gift that no misfortune ever can undo. But now ideas tumbled on ideas, and all the time's mistakes seemed now to lie open to my compassionate correction. So arrogant! One must be arrogant to learn the value of humiliation, the pang of shame that opens up the soul to beauty in the moment of the world. The garden was the master metaphor. I saw time gardened by its own best flowers, laws blossoming from conflicts between laws, the leaf becoming petal, use and need turning to signal, signal to dance and play, life of the parent sacrificed to pay the risk and cost of color and design, the anther and the pistil proffering the offering of DNA's tomorrows. The future made, a future made to hold whatever strange, unique chimera sprang out of the union. Poets were the bee that procuress that tickled them together, made them betray their clone-sealed heritage, and so beget the individual that might find out the next survival niche where a fresh flower incubates its seed. The seed and sememe are at base the same. The semiotic flowers from the sown, and as the seed is still a fresh creation, the ecosystem that creates and nurtures it is changed, and so the outworn parent ages, its cells burn out their candle telomeres, and tragedy is at the heart of Eden, death, the great paradoxical invention of sex and of its notion of the future that opens up the world for further play. I held the world a history of gardens, and in that study, with the spade and shears, shaped an eco-epistemology. The world, neither objective nor subjective, was a shared intersubjectivity, all entities being subjects to themselves and objects to each other, till the moment one being learned to see another's world, the self could see the self in others' eyes, and love became explicit as the source, and grief the proper celebrant of death. The Babylonian gardens birthed the seed of all green classical Arcadias, and now I thought that I would plant it here. Section 6. To make a garden is to make a home upon the humus of a human soil, an oikos in the land's oikology, an ecosystem and economy. A home both builds and needs a history, a dwelling on the story of a place. I had not dwelt here long, and past was scarce, and so I built a future history, a romance epic titled The New World. But how to fashion an economy that would suffice to feed the human spirit? I played with models of a rich exchange, questioned, as had my forebears, what own means, what's propre, what is proper to a thing, or to a person who disposes of it, and saw how persons only have a purchase on the real world if they own property, if only in the precincts of the mind. Devoured political economy, read thirsty in the art of city making, with thinking's tiny screwdriver unpicked the workings of the US Constitution, and wondered whether freedom made us strong to overcome our own perverse compulsions, or discipline needs strengthen us for freedom. I watched my sons grow up and saw the way an ethic roots itself in its delight, but hardship makes us come to know ourselves. I despised money then, like all my kin, but saw that value must be stored to wield the force that builds and causes life to grow. I studied gift exchange, the way the flower trades its sweet favors for the chance to live a second life in union with another, and saw how honey was a currency cooked out of smoke and water by the sun and proffered to the flower's procuresses, and all life was a kind of marketplace, and any disadvantage in the deal was better than to make no deals at all. The sun was the great giver. All the rest, life's intricate and lovely fabric, was woven from closed or open interchanges, paid in some honey golden coin that's brewed and struck to form in the maturing sun. All flesh is grass and photosynthesis, and lives by trading and by capital. In this I parted ways with many friends. Plato had said the world was but a spume playing upon a changeless paradigm, and justice ruled it by a noble lie. The Marxists thought transactions were an evil in which the many slaved to serve the few. Michel Foucault was saying that the world was but an episteme of the oppressor. I was with Melville, who had once supposed that we were all a joint stock marketplace whose product was a working universe, protons and penguins voting with their feet and lucking into laws when things don't work. ecology, economy, writ large, and this was the divine metabolism. But what of love then, if the gift's returned, and thus is but a soft kind of transaction, even if it's unseen, unrecognized? Love could not but be that wide-eyed submission to beauty, with no thought to take possession, no promise, whether planned or else implicit, that the regard should ever be returned, a gladness that what's loved exists at all, humbly to serve its freedom and its fate. I shunned the churches of the right and left. Such love was not what they call unconditioned. The nature of what's loved was the condition. Its beauty was the rightness of its being that opens up the future of the world. Its rightness was its inner interchanges that open up the future of the world. To love was neither sacrifice nor profit, nor justice. That's the balance of the deal. If love was give, the lover first must have, and having is confirmed by its exchange. Love stood upon and thus ennobled trade. Utility was based upon desire, desire meaningless without the value inherent in the thing that is desired, a value that is felt but can't be owned. Trade, then, stood upon love and closed the circle. The buck stopped at the precinct gate of beauty's colonnus and grave and grove. And so I looked upon my wife and sons and saw myself blessed as Odysseus, utterly undeserving, after all my innocent and ruthless raids and crimes, come back to find a home and family. Homer and Shakespeare were my guides and masters. I felt the blessed bond of board and bed. If art was then a growing of the world, no lesser than that first bright condensation, or the hot forging of the elements, or life's first brew 4 billion years ago, then my work was to be a gardener and add conceptions to the common store and lay out Edens fit to house their fall. The genre then was science fiction epic, all epic truly, SF epic. A double shadow first, the world of Mars, 1100 years in the future. The second was the new world, which I've mentioned. Then Genesis, the gardening of Mars. The fourth, years later, was Apocalypse, the flood to come and its heroic healing. A double shadow tried out an idea. Could a society exist whose base was nothing but the rules of pure aesthetics, absent the scarcities of economics, absent the bounds of ignorance or death, a world without morality or ethics? What would the gods do to pass away the time? Titania's quarrels with her Oberon? I found it lovely, passionate, but cold. I had invented my postmodernism, set in the form of a gay Hainan idyll. So much for that. I'd left that California of the mind, and so had returned to earth, to my son's childhood, to my father's death, and to the brown hand with the wedding ring. The new world was another kind of garden, a time garden, whose life was mortal change, where beauty's weight was in its tragedy. But Genesis was something else again, returned to Mars, but not a fairyland. Now I had armed myself with tools of purchase, with science, economics, engineering, with human history and politics, and the great matter of the game of war, creation epic of a future Mars. Houston Space Center folks were reading it. NASA would take me on as a consultant. I lunched with Chris and Sagan out at Ames, and one fine weekend in Ontario, Bob Zubrin, Robert Haynes, and Martin Fogg and I conceived the Mars Society, whose work informed the goals of Elon Musk. I mentioned I'd invented a religion. It was a Trinitarian confession, deriving from, of course, the Christian one, and from the Hindu Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu, Hecate, Persephone, Selena, the Norns, the Morai, and the gentler mothers, and from the late Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, and from the three Ndembu ritual colors, white, black, and red, for milk and death and blood. Pan was the all that is, the past whose pressure drives into being all that comes to be, the blast of the expanding universe, joyful and careless, frank ejaculation of all the forms of chemistry and life, of all that nature is and ever will be, the drunkenness of life, of Dionysus, all that is knowing, knowable, and done, condensing into mind and to intention within the linking neurons of all minds. Yahman was all that has not come to be, and the great absence left by all that dies. Yahman was the privation that makes law, the yawn of Brahman as he sleeps again, the emptiness that is the heart and end of form, the scientist's fierce incomprehension, philosophers the thing that can't be said, that comes at the last edge of morning. Yahman was future, absence that is needed for new things to emerge from Pan's long orgy, Blake's Nobodaddy with his potent no. But Sperimen was present, present, presence, the gift, the moment, and the being there, the fine edge of old Pan, where Pan yields over command to the great suction of the void, the world that's opened, of imagination, the known and unknown region of the blaze, that's neither here nor there, the world of play, true Thomas's third path between the roads to heaven and to hell, the bonny path that winds about the ferny brae, the way to fairyland, yellow brick spiral out in Fibonacci fractals of creation. And this was Jesus, Mary with the angel, Krishna, Da Vinci, Shakespeare, Murasaki, the Beatrice of Dante and of mine, incarnate always in the bodhisattvas and always dying in the sacrifice, the gardener whose sweat falls in the garden, the lamb whose throat is cut in flowering Easter, always resigning to the realm of Yahman and unrepeating, unrepeatable. I baptized Ben in such a spirit, risking all that I had in makeshift poetry, a ritual in the garden with some friends. With these words, I call you into the game, it went, you but lately come from the fire. I used the words of Catholic baptism, but then it all began to change again. The sweet Arcadian idyll could not last, because it never can, because a garden is nothing but a flame, a waterfall, an order that cannot be beautiful unless it bears the seeds of dissolution, unless its petals fade and drop away. Our little group, artists and humanists, was cracked beneath the glaze, a golden bowl. At last we saw we had become the beard for various affairs and spousal breaches, and those high conversations that I loved could not continue when the frank eyes dropped, the urge to the confessional took over, the tactical enlistment in the sin, the offered choice of one or two betrayals. The music of those summer parties faded. Malin was covering the escapades of various figures in the theatre, its curtain of respectability. Oh, yes, we were two prudes, but prudes we were, and a prude's joy and hope can be as real as that of any bold interrogator. Ron Sharp and I revived the old review, but I was totally unqualified, cared little and knew less about the world of literary politics and fashion, liked just a handful of contemporaries, despised the MLA, was skeptical about creative writing as a whole, disliked most novels and short stories of the time, finding their psychological assumptions false to my own experience and demeaning to what I saw splendid in humankind, corrupting as my own friends were corrupted. Ron carried me, I know, gently led me out of my worst decisions. Nonetheless, we published half the great lights of today, most totally unnoticed at the time. But we were overspending, and the college gently dislodged us with a new committee. I swore I'd never play that game again. And then I got that dreadful call from Edie. Vic had endured a massive heart attack, the son of a divorce, without a father. He'd tried to be a father to the world, most tender and most generous to us, but also to his students, colleagues, friends. They said he had a Dionysian vocation, always the merry Falstaff of the party, the Peter Pan who rallied the lost boys, the only unicorn in the whole world, the knight with death still at his saddle bow, the loving pelican who feeds its brood out of the lifeblood of his failing body. We held a requiem mass in Charlottesville, and then at home a grand wake with the drums and masks and dance and beer and celebration fit for a Lunda chieftain's funeral. I had outlived many dear spirit fathers, and ever since would outlive many more, and felt the guilt of my unharmed outliving. But now the grief stung sorely, bitterly, as if it were the heart the hornet smote there, as if it were the heart the hornet smote there in the orchid bower of the Zambesi. After their odd conversion to the church, which had appalled many in their profession, Edie and Vic upended anthropology, expanding it as a true art and science, and in obedience to the church's law, they had created a new family. So now we had two younger brothers who have their own histories I shan't tell here, but they are fine and estimable men. Vic had his mourners then of mind and blood. There was a daughter too, dear Lucy. She was a Down syndrome baby, mild-eyed, loving, and she was catastrophically afflicted, heart, lungs unformed. How could I leave her out? This work is on the flowering of meaning in one man's life, meant as a microcosm of that vast cosmic tree of world emergence. And how does Lucy figure in that story? In one man's life, but does it matter whose? This might as well be about someone else. I do not love autobiography. Lucy could not emerge. She had no time to be. But in my poem at the time, she was a bee who fertilized us all with love. And at Vic's funeral, she flew, perhaps again, the honey of the wake. But still I must leave out so much. The muse is most imperious in her omissions. Meaning is one seed in a beach of sand. Our every moment's loaded with such detail that we are choked with time's divine abundance. And we must be like that Zen gardener I saw once in Japan raking the waves that broke in utter silence on the shore, eschewing all the green luxuriance that towered above the ancient garden wall. Forgive then my incuriosity. It's one man's life, but does it matter whose? All gossip here is surely inadvertent. Mary, my friend, if you are reading this, Forgive the great gaps in this narrative. God only knows the full truth, does it for us. We must discern the pattern in the weave. And so the Arcadian dream of life dissolved. The great beech tree we loved lost all its leaves. Vic's death, my failure as an editor, our friend's descent into soap opera, the current heat death of the liberal arts in deconstruction and the avant-garde, the endless dragging weight of the Cold War that tore apart all civilized discourse, these anxious ruptures opened up a space for further meanings, stricken questionings. If we have failed at gardening our world, was there a way of gardening another? In California, I had seen the world as a great game whose rules we could invent. In Gambia, I would see it as a tree, and we its foresters and gardeners. But humans walk the earth as restless beings, and we uproot ourselves, if not uprooted. And we all need heroic narratives. What would heroic gardening be like? We took a year then and went back to England, to where we started as a family. Was there a way that we could start again? Can there be healing if there is no pain? Section 7. 2,000 lines of 5 iambics each. The human brain remembers perfectly 3 seconds worth of any information, then packs its gist away to pay attention to the next gout of news that comes its way. This is the rule for human poetry. All cultures make a dance out of their speech, a dance that comes in lines or strophes, like the bar or measure music builds itself. And so the human line of poetry across the world is just 3 seconds long, of course with variations. For the gist of poetry exists within the strain, the difference of theme and variation. So if, dear reader, you had read aloud those first 2,000 lines, it would have taken 100 minutes of your own life's time. If my lifetime permits, and here completes 3,000 lines of poetry, it will demand just 50 minutes more. I learned this living numerology out of a 9 years annual conference that took place in Bad Homburg, Germany, upon the theme of beauty and the brain. One beery night, my friend Ernst Purple told of how he had found an odd thing in our hearing. Ernst was himself half deaf, and thus had noticed. Every 3 seconds, speech is interrupted by tiniest pauses to compose new grammar. And if the cycle is distracted, we fall into stammering, as I had done a child on dreaded Mercatoria Street. Poetry, then, is ordered stammering, or else the only way we have that we not stammer, the music that keeps green the tree of grammar. And I had found the same phenomenon, for as my discontent with free verse grew, I didn't soon resign the modern flag carried in glory against sing-song verse, but sought in other languages a measure outflanking both the moderns and their foes, a synthesis of thesis and of sin. And my research turned up a strange result. All human cultures practice poetry. All poetry comes in separated lines. The lines on average 3 seconds long, varying but a second more or less. A blaze of insight broke on Ernst and me. Hung over at the conference next day, we stammered out our strange discovery. We published, and the piece, The Neural Lyre, is still foundational to much research. Thus, meter's rule is not some Euro thing, but in humanity's inheritance. And so this poem's game is that of threes, the 3-way jointure of the snaky tree, the 3 blind feet of Oedipus's old man, major and minor premise and conclusion, the subject and the object and the verb, the rites of entrance, passage, and emergence, the input and the output and the gate, the father and the mother and the child, the measure of all nature's dialectic, inheritance, mutation, and selection. The line is not a Western imposition. It is the period of the present moment. Rhyme marks the place the next line will begin, the natural ornament of our word song. It's prose or free verse that's unnatural. They're shorthands for the full event of song. But now I was in trouble with the poets. Free verse was then the universal norm. Certainly I must be a classicist, and thus a Euro-fallow-logocentrist. But what if classic is just natural, a feature, not a bug of human cultures? What if the claim to not be classicist were the last gasp of Western snobbery? What if the noble forms of poetry were what unite, not sever, the world's races? My poetry was un-American? Like blues, you mean? Cole Porter? Country music? The ballad? Rap? Or Broadway musicals? They rhyme and keep the measure of the line, and so did I. So much for mere polemic. No, free verse is a form like any other. It has its uses and inadequacies. I use it sometimes when I want to substitute another form like biblic repetition, or to repeat a given piece of grammar whose variations carry my intent, or joking make a bureaucratic list, or represent a certain anomie, a breakdown in the rhythmic flow of thought, to show, evoke the true unmemorable, mimicking the unmemorizable. But let me do it justice. When an image catches a moment, as in a haiku, sometimes one wants to still the rhythm down, to let the emptiness become the form. But even the haiku itself is a form, 1.5 lines drawn from epic meter. I wrote those lines 3 weeks ago. The world has changed. The great beast of the East has struck the dear community of human beings, and his bewildered legions, leaderless, strike out in flame and murder in the cities, marked with a Z, the white half swastika. My own beast gave permission for the blow. Our own beast gave permission for the blow. It could be that this poem will be lost in deconstruction beyond metaphor within some electronic holocaust, lies now made valid by the death of truth, that when the mushrooms blossom on the lands, as once in Oxford I had feared they would, all thought and poetry will be erased, together with the woman, man, and child. All the more reason to keep going then. I think of brave Zelensky and his word, telling his truth embattled in the siege, a truth as with a duelist, insured by its defender's stake of his own death. So where was I then? Yes, on poetic form. So is this fiddling while Europe burns? Miklos Radnoti once, in World War II, was caught out by a friend in Budapest, mumbling ta-tum upon the street. How can you think of poetry today? Hitler will kill us all. Miklos replied, verse is the only weapon that I have. They found his last poems in his greatcoat pocket when he was dug up from his cold mass grave. I did not mean to be so rigorous about the discipline of metric form. One needn't be a scholar. All it takes is that the ear has caught some simple form and passed that custom to the living tongue and found a universe of variation within the simple melody it found. Some poets have but one, like Dickinson, or Whitman with his biblic liturgy, or Marinai with his Homeric dactyls, the formalists with their loose-limbed iambics, or the rap poets with their macaronics. The Beatles can't read music, and so what? Others, like Hopkins, Eliot, or Yeats, or dear profane John Donne, or sweet Verlaine, master a range of forms and change their face as gifted actors do upon the stage. Art is a bond of act and principle. The student can from principle learn act, or can discover principle in practice. In my art of karate, it's the latter. The katas teach you all you need to know. On with the story here, such as it is. A string to hang a bunch of beads on that may spell, as in a divination, something that can't be nominated otherwise, a meaning that reflects itself and means the mystery that drives the world of being. So now I was the founder of a movement. I argued that the core forms of my arts, that melody for music, plot for story, timed step for dance, meter for poetry, mimetic action for the drama, scaled proportion for the art of architecture, and picturing in all the visual arts in counterpoint with sign and patterning were not just local cultural conventions, nor signals to enforce social control, nor tribal markers, power politics, social hegemony, or interventions, but grand affordances that nature found, brain structures honed by time and evolution, as special as the hand and as the eye, as language is, as laughter, as the smile, and like them, handy for all kinds of uses, and further, where the roots of meaning lie, beyond all theories of reference, beyond the breach of mention and of use, ancestral continuity of life, extended growth of temporality, the further history of the universe, matter become prehensile in the stuff of physical existence in itself, that is, of light, whose name is information, the logos of the deity of time. I named it, therefore, natural classicism, a paradox in post-structural terms, and argued that the classical was not Roman or Greek or European or the opposite of the abject subaltern, but where the current of the human genius flows when it is fullest and most free, that modernism and postmodernism were themselves the cultural constraints invented by certain castes to mark their special status, codes that exclude the common search for beauty. Contra construction, we do have a nature. That nature's cultural, we bred ourselves, which culture is always the classical. All else is snobbery and power seeking. And thus, the form of epic that's the fount of every global classical tradition is where the truly avant-garde must be. I found the epic now in science fiction, or rather science fiction is the oldest of all the arts, and epic storytelling our earliest science as our earliest fiction. There was a time when this became a thing, new formalism or new narrative, expansive poetry, radical center. It got politicized, but brought together some friends I value and a conversation. Fred Firestein, poet psychologist, wise Dana Joyer, brilliant Paul Lake, Claudia Gary, Steffi de Kennedy, Emily Grossholtz, the philosopher, Frederick Hart of the Great Heart and Eye, and Steve Assail, the master, Jacob Collins, and Robin Fox, the anthropologist, Jan Schreiber, David Rothman, David Mason, and Annie Finch, Jack Butler, and John Gary, Sam Gwynn, surely the funniest of us all, Great Heart James Cooper, master editor, and many more whose names will come to me when this part of the poem is set in stone. The work that I and Purple had begun became the thread that would, for me, unravel the whole fabric of late modernity as it explained itself in criticism and turned the criticism into art. That fabric had two surfaces. One claimed that all we think and will is preordained by our psychology and driven by our genes. The other claimed, besides, that all we are is social puppetry. Our dance of self, of freedom and responsibility is but a twitch of strings and at the whim of culture, society, money, and power. How then did human versifying thwart the claim that we're but robots of the genes. Like language in itself, what meter was an elaborate free machine for freedom, a system that made choice inevitable, that opened up a world of possibility, as that line did a rogue hexameter. What bio-nature wanted then was not a blind obedience, but enterprise. Imagination was a native drive to be what nature could not yet imagine. The refutation of the social claim to a definitive determinism was easier still and shocking in its scope. For if, as it turned out, this complex art form, this segmentation of the flow of speech by rules into 3 seconds worth of information and modulated by a further set of rules to make an open universe of meaning, if this strange game was common to our species, to every possible regime or tribe, economy, belief, or episteme, the writ of social cause does not run far. And if we add the arts of picturing, of melody, of dance and storytelling, of ritual drama and inspired mimesis, of visual glyph and sign and ornament, cuisine, cosmetics, and the craft of perfume, and all the things made with those arts that we value and purchase, truck with and exchange, and all the technological devices we invent to realize what we imagine, and all the integral constraints of science, and all the self-constraining rules of scholarship, what is there left for this society to dominate and to determine then? All that is left is politicians and their bureaucrats, their purges and arrests. The self-imposed constraints of this long poem demand it be largely incorrigible. In freedom, I created those constraints and freely follow them and lay them on the pattern of old bonds that shape and rule me, social or natural, or their collusions. And as organza, flung upon a gauze, suddenly blooms out with diffraction waves, a new order supervenes upon the old and masters both the old nets with its new. But what it means is that I leave things out. The poets I forgot in that short list, for instance, and 100 visions that still shape and tint my dreams and memories, I can't go back and make up the omission, and so must circle back and think again and see a different meaning in the words. Is truth the very things that are left out? One of them was of a ridge line at dusk, seen through a tiny window in the loft of my Aunt Josie's house when I was 12. My Uncle Tom, the forester, and she, and my 3 cousins, Peter, Steph, and John, had made their home in an old water mill whose name was Whitebrook for its falling water. Whitebrook. The word itself is Rivendell, is Dulce Domum, Mr. Mole's sweet home, is the Swiss family Robinsons, is the Swiss family's cheerful Felsenheim, the earth cave in the heart of Tunstall Forest, the mountain hideout of Umslopogaas. And so that warm loft bedroom with its quilt and the dark wooded ridge against the glow bring back all the adventures with my cousins, my long, deep arguments with Uncle Tom, and Josie's sweet maternity and music, and that whole second family I loved, and how Mei Lin became their Chinese daughter, all that I hadn't mentioned until now. That must have been the hidden reason why we spent our first night's honeymoon nearby in the deep valley of the River Wye. I think it was such memories as that one that kept me whole through all the culture wars and damped the righteous glow of my polemics and made me question any politics, even the great cause of poetic form. In Bucha now, bodies rot in the streets. What quilt or coverlet against the sky have we to cover their indignity? Words only now, the noble antiphon by which the soul comes to compose itself for its great passion for its great passage to futurity, its garment of initiation in the rite of meaning giving to the world, camouflage netting made of rags and worn out comfort blankets and a ribbon a bride once wore to tie her soft black hair. Section 8. It seems as if I've traveled weeks or months or years across a cloud-swept tableland where many things befell I don't remember, but there were 5 old cities with their griefs and pleasures, and 2 shadowy forests there, but now I've come to where the ground begins to fall away, and as I travel on, the signs of habitation fade, the roads a track through unkept moor, and now the evening's coming on, the vision opens, and so I see a vast and distant land still falling, but more gently as it fades into a distance where it seems the clouds no longer hide the golden setting sun, and there beyond, perhaps, there is a flash of silver from a far and unknown sea. This is a metaphor of my search for meaning, or rather, for I always felt a meaning, often abundantly and lucently. My search for how to say in words how words and all the other stuffs that art is made of perform that strange activity to mean. That's what the infant speaker stammerer first wrestled with 76 years ago, and what the poet did, but knew not what. And in the years to follow, I would needs make clear to me this thing I could not speak, but spoke by and emerged when I would write. I now could see the dark cloud had an edge, that line of gold that beckoned far away, but the huge lands that lay there in between, wider than those I had already traveled, worlds of philosophy and politics, theology and economics, science and history and culture and critique, must yet be trudged through and explored, and all their dangers suffered and exposed. Perhaps the deepest veil, the darkest rift that I must walk to seek how things might mean, was that of time, the self-renewing fire, the branching, flaming river of creation. Julius Fraser found me in the 80s. He'd read my Shakespeare book, the one on time, and so I joined the Time Society, a strange, hermetic brother-sisterhood from almost every corner of the earth, and I have been a member ever since. So what is time? What Fraser showed was what I'd half intuited in Africa. That time was like a growing tree, a branched and protean, still exploring organism, and that the very process of its life, its evolution, in itself evolves, that all things that we notice about time, its length, its difference from space, its prior and subsequent, its arrow, its direction, its work of cause, whatever that might be, its past and future, and its gathered now, its fertile matrix of alternatives, all these did not exist when it began and must be birthed by its inhabitants. We, particles and atoms, trees and humans, make up our time worlds to exist and last in, carve out our Umwelt and our niche to be, join in commensal worlds, ecologies, and form the substrate for the next emergence. Time has a history that we can trace from quantum prototemporality, back in the white-hot dawn of the Big Bang, to matter's eotemporality, to living biotemporality, to our own nootemporality, within which nested lie all former times. Things make the time they live in, and space too is secondary, just the difference one thing requires not to be another. Pauli explained it long ago, but no one had really got exclusion at the time. We are not passive dwellers in space-time, but makers of it, like a snail its shell. Goethe, I found out later, knew it all. How that great harmony or compromise by which all local entities agree is still negotiating. Math and physics are settled, but for cases like black holes, chemistry's still a web of clever kludges loaded with catalytic epicycles, and biosystems are a wild frontier whose wildest edge is human art and choice. This being so, the logos of it all is being uttered at this very moment, and as the creator, we might name it God. This was a natural theology. If personhood's the highest form of time, why grant it to the person that's a part and not to what contains it that's the whole? And what then is that personality? What can we know of it from what it does, from what it's suffered through, what pains it's given, what pains it took to grow into itself, what griefs it must have borne and have exacted as sentience emerged to make them sharper, what species must have died to make a better, but then what hope, what love, what glory must have driven it to play its great wild game, this humblest of all viable storytellers, who gives his characters the freest rein. One much marked character in history who really looks like that was Jesus Christ. So if you want a glimpse at God's own person, that Middle Eastern chap will have to do. Or so on better days, it seems to me. As I've got older, please bear with me now. The relevance will show itself in time. I find I have a curious flaw of vision. Each eye sees very well, but more and more I cannot bring the two worlds into one. A stage drunkard who takes his wife for twins. My good optician fixes it each year as the strange gap gets wider, but the flaw perhaps is more than an analogy, and I must rely upon the lens maker and on the sciences of light and brain to make of two flat worlds a rounded one. Did I, a child, injure some growing muscle with my experiment upon the ship? And must I now, a sight-lamed Oedipus, use a prosthesis to amend my sight? Or is prosthesis only a reminder of that dependence everyone must bear, and the reminder helps us see more deeply how the universe in mutual concrescence makes itself up in its divine creation? Is then the flaw organic to the making, the itch upon the growing bud of time? I think this story does show two Fred Turners, a blunt, pragmatic one that doesn't flinch at the necessity of selfishness, who sees that cause and trade must rule the world, and the delighted lover of the earth, for whom each living moment is a gift, taking each human as a miracle. But I'm a poet only when the visions merge tragically into depth and form. Does that great person, that is time itself, the growing universe, need glasses too, to bring together wave and particle, to make from life and death a growing whole? The titles of my books unconsciously betray that constant double-sightedness between two lives, Shakespeare and Time, Return, and Counter-Terror, and A Double Shadow, The New World as conceived upon an old, and The Morality of Love and Money, subtitle of my second Shakespeare book, and Natural Religion, harnessing two big words wont to contradict each other, Hadean eclogues, Eden built on hell, a paradise whose birth is suffering, and Genesis, implied as second Genesis, and then apocalypse, the star-doomed ending of one world, then revealed as quite another, gardening in an April wind. Sometimes the bifurcated vision holds as one, but all its future flowers from paradox, intention from the unintentional. Now I must hurry with my story, which must be constricted to the chosen form. We left Ohio, built a house in Dallas, and I took on the task of city making, the largest kind of gardening there is, and found there comrades in the enterprise and saw the place emerging from the shame of a king's murder to become a giant, 1 million growing as we watched to 8. We taught the people who now teach the city. What then? New friends and colleagues as professors, midwifing a new university, 35 years of teaching, writing, travel, book after book, some spoken of already, conceived before but later written down, 2 epics more, a book about world epic, 6 books of poems, 3 of ranging essays, 2 plays with their concomitant productions, 6 books of poetry in co-translation, so many writings, published or unpublished, papers on new environmentalism, merging the thought of Lovelock, Jordan, Hodges, notes upon sacrifice and commutation, thought as the strange attractors of brain firings, the golden ratio as the simplest fractal, computational physics and AI, some founding texts of the new formalism, with Gigi Ojvath, new translation theory, of which much more hereafter, and much practice, and further lucubrations upon time. And somehow there was life outside the study, the evolution of an ancient marriage, a house, and then a cottage in the country, the slow mastering of a martial art, the launch of 2 sons out into the world, the friendships and those journeys on the earth. I spoke and studied on 5 continents, woke under unknown ceilings, wandered out after the conference in strange new cities, greeted old friends, and got the latest news. And always on the last night, so it seemed, it rained, and drops ran down the window pane, and we stayed drinking till they stacked the chairs, and I would never come that way again. There still remains a ghost of that republic of lettered folks that made the modern world by rediscovering the old anew, though many of its intellectual cities are burned out by bad fashions and revenge. I found a true priest, and for many years returned to church and shared its mode of meaning, loving its ritual and poetry, but finally must part on 2 main grounds. One was its crimes against the child brought on by self-made superstitions about sex, diminishing to ritual taboo true sins against friend, spouse, and family, thus making sweeter that which is forbidden, and fetishizing certain human cells as if they were a scarce magic token, not recognizing nature's own abundance. For when I scratch, I kill a dozen Freds. The other was its like taboo on money. To truly love the poor, one makes them rich, and riches are invented by the market, the coin of Caesar that we render to him, as that wise Palestinian suggested, so that the poor may learn to fish and grow and multiply the fishes and the loaves and pay the artist and the artisan, and so let capital investment thrive. Ezra thought otherwise, and in his madness served one who wrought a murder of the Jews. But we are more than bodies, more than means, and money means more than the mean imagine. We do not need the supernatural, except, of course, the present's self-transcendence, to stamp the metal of experience with signs that nature does not furnish free. Perhaps the church, except in art and music, never quite got the point of incarnation, that Jesus was the Son of Man, whose mother birthed him with genes that go back on the earth to the first cells of the deep Precambrian, that mind is matter's flowering and prize, and paradise needs only ears, ears and eyes. Perhaps a life is its own meaning then. Perhaps the existentialists were right. It isn't easy spotting the mistake, but words themselves reveal the inner error. A word is but a grunt or clicking squeal without the speaker world that gives it meaning. If no one can speak French, a word in it is meaningless. One's life has meaning then, not as a man of means, nor even as a virtuous chap who keeps the golden mean, but as a maker of an end, to make an end that leaves a cell of that still forming body, which is the fetus of our forming Lord. Almost one might say that the meaning of it is just its death, its feeding of itself into the life of others, who in turn grow into individuality and so to meaning makers of their own. The poet's end, then, is to be a means. Yes, but a poem is not just a servant, doesn't just serve the good, but is a good. And such a good is more august and strange, more undecipherable if its reader cannot submit to its free discipline than any act of charity or care. Its waywardness and danger are the sign that something's being added to the whole that goes beyond correction or repair. Such art is not by artists only, but whoever masters a life craft such as marriage, science, wise dealing in a market, gardening, even a game like basketball or chess, and adds a carved thing to its laws of practice. When Vic died, decades passed, the family, together with his colleagues and his friends, gave him a full Ndembu funeral with anthropologists and drama folks and masks and dancing, drumming and much beer, laughter as much a music there as tears. Perhaps no odder thing had ever happened in any basement in old Charlottesville. I think we all, amid the grief, felt something strangely joyful, a great wind blowing through, completion, or the adding of a piece to the vast celebration of the world. When Edie died, I did not feel that wind. Dementia had not touched her driving spirit, although she had lost her short-term memory. She had gone on teaching until 94 and wept when gently pressured to retire. I was at her retirement party, and next day she asked me, as our custom, for our walk. She was quite cheerful, talked about a book, though we both knew it was too late for that. And arm in arm we toddled up the path, Mummy and Freddie, but the roles reversed. I led the way when we got to the road. Cars would come through there like a green Daytona. She stumbled, lost her grip, fell over backward. The poor old thing had knocked her frizzled skull. She was unconscious. I, a little boy, abandoned. 3 months later, she was dead. We had a grand memorial indeed, but I have never truly buried her. I think I was a disappointment to her. I never trusted in communitas and joined no party and disliked the left almost as cordially as the right. I knew that any human we requires a they, like Vic feared damned compact majorities, like Vic a Peter Pan locked out at last. She tried so hard to love and understand me, but I was of the kind whose word must end. Maybe the nag's head had caught up with me. And yet we're so alike, so driven by duty, so bien pensant, so hopeful for the best, passionate for human equality, deeply suspicious of all politicians. She never got my irony on the market, how base desires could power human good. She never saw what I saw in the classics, nor understand my love for martial arts. She never got my joy in argument to always see the other point of view. That's the end of part 8. Section 9. So something's missing in my art of meaning. My heart hurts often for her as my mum, but still it claws for freedom from her law, forced to resentfully acknowledge it, preempted in my own less fierce compassion for those she called the ordinary people, who, for her, were God's only favorites. I didn't want the comfort of belonging. I wanted meaning, cared not where I found it. To mean is to intend, attempt, and point, to really signify what's really out there, to use the dictionary rightly and not harm the ship that bears us through the world's wild waves. It should command an effort and should care and mind and think and feel, make sense of things. It ought to tell a story we remember. It ought to have ideas that are alive. What friends could one like me still hope for? I always sought out people who had wisdom, who having it had no need of suspicion, and would not turn on me behind my back. I seek out people who can trust while knowing what interests might mar another's trust, and so could render them untrustworthy, and despite this choose to believe in me, the legacy of my long strangerhood. The paranoids indeed are out to get you, but their effectiveness is compromised by their own patent untrustworthiness. Trust them, and sometimes their surprise undoes them. They will not take the bait, believe it tainted. Better to play it straight, not spring the trap. They're dangerous only when their predictions of what you wanted truly are confirmed. When you offend your own true code of honor, yes, be God's holy fool, but know it well, and look the tragic and dishonest world full in the face, and smiling, love it still. In the last decade of my masquerade as the professor and professional, this is not modesty, I did it well, gave it good value for the money, worked at it. I saw that meaning is a moral thing, that mere repetition is a sin, and mere innovation is a worse one. And meaning needs a place where it can happen, and friendship is the place the miracle chooses to happen in the warm between, the habitable zone of air and water, the space between the unknown and the known, the place to cut the blaze that opens up the present moment in its hemisphere of liberty and intimate creation, its bubble, like old Dante's dome of pagans, or his delightful valley of the kings, or Oz, the Zauber Insel, or Dilmun, the Western Mountain, or Sarastro's halls, the fairyland you find if you have taken the path that winds about the Ferny Brae, the Deer Park Paradise, or Tirnan Og, or Xanadu, the endless sentences of Milton's sinuous pentameter. It is in friendship, not the zero sum of politics and ideology, or war's repetitive sub-zero sum, that the freed soul, in a strange paradox, can find the solitude to weave its story. Friends give each other such a solitude. And so, dear friends, I name you one by one. The dead ones, Ed and Robert, Roy and John, Pishta and Tom and Robert, sharp old Patton, the wounded healer Fred, who told such stories, the other Fred, the one whose theatre returns the human world to us transformed, wisest of all, my bright-eyed Julius, John, Tom and Roy, my teacher John, and George, I wish I'd been a better friend to you, for you helped me truly what I am. And then those Englishmen who are still alive, my student friends who wear the old man's mask, David and James and Tim and Mystic Chris, jovial Barney, Ed, and skeptic John, Alex, with whom I laughed my way through Greece, Arthur and Bill, and Jake, the hero poet who led me through the mountains of Malsia, Big Paul, whose laugh unburdened opens time, and Ron, who once thought that I betrayed him, Michael and Barnaby, and gentle Baynard, Stephen, who taught me most of what I know of the political economy, the artists, Barnaby and David, who provided me with eyes to see the world, and Michael, newly found, who taught me Lear, the poets, Jan and Dana, David, James, Michael and Rob, who will refound the schools, Larry, who made a noble conversation, and Chris and Jim, whose music I still hear. There's something that I think I should explain. You must have asked me, what about the women? For they perhaps have formed my meanings deeper than any bearded one could ever do, because those friendships do not mirror us, but show us somehow what we cannot see, concave where we are convex, high when low, inner when outer, outer when we're closed. Linda, who sails her fiery boat of wit, Gail, the grand chatelaine of her soft empire, Mary of Parsonsfield, the fertile one, Mary who makes a landscape with a stroke, Anne who can draw the inner life of trees, Emily of the spires of mathematics, Bernie who mines the ancient moors of Thule, Lenore, who makes of politics a game, Simi, whose eloquence is like a flower, and Anne Marie, that dark and Flemish angel. There's something else here that I must explain. These odd romantic friendships I've been blessed with. Of course, it's that small glow, as sweet to us as Mum's baked apples by the autumn fire, and the small vertigo and thrill we feel upon the rock above the roaring chasm, as honeysuckle in the April wind, a glow that, yielded to, would break the spell and cast that delicate structure to the ground. Meaning is a sweet province of the future, something quite virginal and innocent, kept ever present by the blaze of art. Sometimes the finest consummation is the island of unconsummatedness. And then there's Yuji, dearest of them all, who dreamy pianist hid in the ruins of burning Budapest as bodies turned among the scarlet ice flows of the Danube and fled to this strange land, America, within her head the poetry of Europe, who came to be my guide near 40 years, and we translated Radnoti and Faust. I won't speak here at length about my sons. Daniel and Ben are principalities unto themselves, and I am something past that watches as they make the world their own. Maya and Daisy are the miracle that blooms upon the last dawn of my days. Maylin you know already, I believe. Poor lady, I have dressed her with my poems. I wanted here to name all of the dear ones that shaped the living meaning of my time, but I am sure that I must have forgotten great spirits who still move beneath my mind. This form that I have chosen is incorrigible, as life is, such that what is missed remains a ghost that drives and haunts the verse to come. The point is, meaning is our conversations that are the neural firings of a brain. This is as far beyond our comprehension as I am for the cells that fire my thought. But isn't this a mere anatomy of what the sociologists believe is the conspiracy of class or race, consensus in oppression of the other, meaning both is and is not such a crime? We live in darkening times. Our current plague, as do all plagues, creates conspiracies, the atavistic fear of infection by those whose strangerhood makes them a curse, the scapegoats that must now be exorcised, together with all traitors in our walls, rides on a pale horse through the continents. The plague in Athens, played as that of Thebes, evoked the holy and atrocious act that tears the human family to rags. The heat storm that now beats about the planet projects our sickness to the world itself, and so the mad-eyed Kronos of the East has woken and devours his progeny. What we call meaning now is paranoia. Class theory was the answer to the plague of strange modernity and unknown change. Critical theory made race and sex diseases that must be excoriated, and populism took those instruments and turned them into brutish tyranny. The clocks turned back to 1943. If this poem has a meaning that's political, it is that meaning is reality, that meaning's not a kind of paranoia. Meaning can never be divorced from truth, though it can follow truth or lead it. This poem argues, should it do so then? By now we're squeezed from poetry. By now we've squeezed from poetry all juice of other language uses, imaging and connotation, sentiment, elision, symbol and layout, dialect and trope. What we have left is argument and story. Those roots, perhaps, may yet provide the sap to feed the faded leaves and plump the fruit, but only to complete the metaphor if there's a new dawn of the sun of truth. The clocks turned back to 1943. Again, the noblest passions in the world, to be world saviors, fighters for your country, has been perverted by a clever tyrant into a waste of savage crime and war. And those same passions, still so dangerous, have been recruited to a brave reply. Gallant Zelensky, can he keep the spirit of that poor schoolteacher that he portrayed? It is a matter of the Held Erleben, the hero life my poetry explored, each time more urgently and questioningly. And in my martial arts, I followed in the footsteps of my master Alex Tong, a gentleman who is a gentleman. All of my warriors were quite reluctant. One of them nearly drank himself to death. Can poetry still play the ancient role of mentor? Let's try new meaning for conspiracy, breathing together the sweet air of the world, unmasked and immunized against the virus. But that means reasoned argument and science. We need a poetry that can delight and can convince, at least by honest means. But poetry ought to be beautiful. And what's the beauty of an argument? Think of that elegance when both sides find logic and evidence that makes a case that differs from the bromides of each side. Chess elegance, how when this happens, both have learned, ideas pop and glow between them. What's prophecy but argument that's founded upon a moral factuality? And is not prophecy the highest poem? And so I end my sermon and defense. So what is meaning then? We start with I, for where there is no I, there is no meaning. But is the I a purely human thing? Animals have an eye, although they can't see it. And plants concern themselves in their green trades. Even a rock is here, not over there. An atom fires a particle when hit that is its own and not of its assailant. All things possess an outer and an inner, or cannot be identified as things. All signal and are signaled into being, deictic, and thus in some way lovable. Meaning is progeny. In that first burst, math meant itself into an energy, and energy found matter was its meaning. The elements were all its varied senses, turning in turn into the alphabet of chemistry that spoke life into being with its poetical catalysis. And we, the ones with nervous systems, use that further alphabet to mean our minds. Of what then are we all the alphabet, Alpha and Omega, that singing voice that speaks the future always into being? The dog who lies beside me on the sofa, happy to be beside her human being, her blue eyes opening a little as she comes and goes within a twitch foot dream, is absolutely what she is expressing, her thought entirely patent in her limbs, an inner being unconsciously revealed. Animal spirit as she is, I drowse and feel the moment thicken into words. Malin is dreaming too, that world within the dark event horizon of her wits, her irony relaxed, her bright brown eyes now inward as she reads on in her book. This is the next moment, shell after shell of time stuff that is sent in light swift waves as surely as the signals to our phones now dormant on the white-topped kitchen table out to the vast time libraries of space. How may we read in such a library? What? Capture a black hole and siphon off the moments of the past encrypted there? Or is it something much more complicated? Fly with the present outward as it flies. Die then in every moment of our time, or rather be the dying as it happens. Over this life, I've died a dozen times. When I left Africa and went to school, when I beheld my bride in her white dress coming to silly old America, betrayals that I will not speak of, failures, the earthquake births of Daniel and of Ben, their new eyes opening into the light, my Malin turned into a Gaian power, a massive surgery that split my guts, drugged till my memories became the album of another person's life. And now this present death that's come upon me in our new self-imposed apocalypse of virus, global change, and paranoia, and I have put away my cap and gown. Meaning is how to follow all those deaths into the lives they came from, and be that of which they were the outline, shape, and verge. Death is the sacrifice for greater meaning. Sacrifice redeemed as a subsumption, consumed as mint is in the consomme. Nin's brown, long forehead now subsumed in Ben's, that Nin whose soul was a musician's, who worked himself to death to feed his children. Meaning is not a diorama label. It is the very force of evolution. Every death for me became a conversation with something much, much bigger than I was, something that chuckled sometimes when we spoke, and surely was more wise than I, and kind. Nothing is lost, it said. I was as free as that time by the roaring creek in spring, out by our cabin in the Texas hills, the mesquite tree lit by the morning sun, so green it seemed a brighter kind of white, burned in the dark blue of the sky, and left a crimson image in the eye.